When a billionaire CEO mocks a struggling father in front of his daughter, she has no idea she just humiliated the one man who could destroy her career with a single phone call. That's exactly what happened on a freezing Chicago morning when Victoria Sterling walked into a luxury car dealership and made the worst mistake of her life. What unfolded next exposed corporate corruption, shattered egos, and proved that the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous. If you want to see how this story ends, stick around until the final word, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The glass doors of Premier Automotive Chicago swung open at exactly 9:47 a.m., letting in a blast of November air that smelled like exhaust fumes and coming snow. Ryan Mercer stepped inside first, one hand holding the door, the other gently guiding his 6-year-old daughter Sophie through the entrance. She clutched her stuffed rabbit, a threadbare thing with one missing eye and an ear that had been sewn back on 3 times, against her yellow winter coat. Ryan's boots squeaked against the polished marble floor. His work jacket, faded blue with a small tear near the left shoulder, looked gray under the showroom's brilliant LED lights. He needed a haircut. His jeans had a paint stain on one knee. To anyone paying attention, he looked exactly like someone who'd gotten off at the wrong stop. Sophie's eyes went wide as she took in the showroom. 6 luxury vehicles sat on raised platforms like sculptures in a museum. A midnight blue sports car, a pearl white SUV with chrome accents that caught the light like diamonds, a vintage convertible restored to showroom perfection. Each one probably cost more than most people made in 5 years. "Daddy, they're so shiny," Sophie whispered, her voice small in the cavernous space. "They are, sweetheart." Ryan's voice was quiet, steady. He didn't sound impressed or intimidated, just observant. A young salesman, couldn't have been more than 23, glanced up from his desk near the entrance, took one look at Ryan's jacket and boots, and immediately looked back down at his computer screen. Not his problem. Not his commission. Ryan noticed. He always noticed. The showroom manager, a man named Derek Hastings, with perfect silver hair and a suit that probably cost $3,000, stood near the center display. He was laughing at something one of the other salespeople had said, his voice carrying across the marble in a way that suggested he enjoyed hearing himself talk. Ryan walked slowly toward the vintage convertible, Sophie's hand in his. She pressed her face against the velvet rope barrier, staring at the cream-colored leather interior. "Is this the prettiest car in the whole world?" she asked. "Might be," Ryan said. "What do you think?" "I think it looks like something a princess would drive." Ryan smiled. Not the polite smile people give children when they're not really listening. A genuine smile that reached his eyes and made the tired lines around them soften. "You've got good taste, kiddo." That's when the second set of glass doors opened. Victoria Sterling didn't walk into rooms. She arrived in them. 30 years old, 5'9" in heels that brought her to 6 feet, wearing a black wool coat that probably cost more than Ryan's monthly rent. Her dark hair was pulled back in a style that looked effortless but definitely wasn't. Diamond earrings caught the light. Her expression was the kind of neutral that people in boardrooms learn to perfect, revealing nothing, promising less. 2 people followed her, a younger woman in a gray suit carrying a leather portfolio, and a man in his 40s who looked like he'd been hired specifically to look intimidating in expensive clothes. Derek's entire demeanor changed, his spine straightened, his smile shifted from casual to calculated. He moved across the showroom floor like a heat-seeking missile. "Ms. Sterling," he said, extending his hand before he'd fully reached her. "Right on time. Your vehicle arrived yesterday evening, and I can assure you it's absolutely perfect. The custom interior specifications were executed flawlessly. I'll be the judge of that," Victoria said. Her voice wasn't cold exactly, just efficient, like she'd calculated exactly how many words were necessary and refused to waste any extras. She shook his hand once, released it, and glanced around the showroom. Her eyes landed on Ryan and Sophie. Something flickered across her face, not quite disgust, more like confusion, followed by mild irritation. The look someone gives when they find something out of place in their carefully organized world. Derek followed her gaze and his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I apologize for any distractions," Derek said quietly. "We'll have that handled immediately." Victoria didn't respond. She was already walking toward the back office where the paperwork waited. But Derek stayed behind for a moment, and his expression shifted into something uglier. He caught the eye of the young salesman who'd ignored Ryan earlier and gave him a look that clearly said, "Deal with this." The salesman stood, reluctant, and started walking toward Ryan with all the enthusiasm of someone approaching a mess they'd been told to clean up. Ryan saw him coming. He didn't move, just stood there with Sophie, who was now explaining to her stuffed rabbit about the different cars in careful, serious tones. "Sir," the salesman said, stopping a few feet away, "can I help you find something?" The way he said help made it clear he meant leave. Ryan turned slowly. His expression was calm, patient, the kind of patience that came from years of dealing with people who underestimated him. "I'm here to see a vehicle," Ryan said. "Right, well, sir, this is Premier Automotive. We specialize in luxury and custom vehicles. The price points here start around—" "I know where I am," Ryan said quietly. The salesman's smile got tighter. "Of course, it's just that we typically work by appointment, and I don't see your name on our— I don't have an appointment." "I see." The salesman glanced back toward Derek, who was watching from across the showroom with crossed arms. "Well, if you're interested in exploring your options, we have several partner dealerships across the city that might be more suitable for your— Daddy, is he saying we have to leave?" Sophie's voice was small, confused. The salesman's face flushed slightly. "No, sweetheart. I'm just trying to help your dad understand." "I understand perfectly," Ryan said. Still calm, still quiet. But something in his tone made the salesman stop talking. "We're not here by accident. We're exactly where we're supposed to be." Behind them, Victoria emerged from the back office with Derek. She was holding a tablet, scrolling through something with one perfectly manicured finger, while Derek hovered beside her like a man trying to predict what she wanted before she asked for it. "The Maybach specs are all confirmed," Derek was saying. "Custom midnight paint, the Napa leather interior in cognac, the upgraded sound system you requested." "And the chrome delete?" Victoria asked, not looking up. "Complete. Exactly as specified." Victoria nodded, still scrolling. Then she looked up, and once again her eyes found Ryan and Sophie across the showroom. This time she didn't look away. She walked toward them. Derek scrambled to follow. Ryan watched her approach. He didn't straighten his posture or fix his jacket. Didn't do anything to make himself look more presentable. He just stood there, one hand resting on Sophie's shoulder. Victoria stopped about 6 feet away, close enough to speak without raising her voice, far enough to maintain a calculated distance. "Excuse me," she said. Her tone was the perfect balance of polite and dismissive. "I couldn't help but notice you've been here for several minutes without any clear purpose." The young salesman looked mortified. Derek looked pleased. Ryan just looked at her. "We're here to see a vehicle." "I'm sure you are." Victoria's smile was razor thin. "But Premier Automotive isn't really a browsing establishment. These are custom vehicles with very specific clientele. I'm sure there are other dealerships in the area that might be more accessible." Sophie pressed closer to Ryan's leg, her rabbit tucked tight against her chest. "More accessible," Ryan repeated. His voice stayed level. "I'm simply trying to save you time," Victoria said. "The vehicles here start at prices that, frankly, don't align with window shopping. The bus station is 2 blocks north. There's a very reputable used car lot on Madison Street that's much more budget-friendly." Someone near the coffee station laughed. Not loud, just a quiet snicker that carried in the marble and glass space. Sophie's face went red. She looked down at her scuffed sneakers. Ryan felt his daughter's embarrassment like a physical weight. But his expression didn't change. He reached down and gently squeezed Sophie's shoulder, a silent message that everything was okay. "Thank you for the directions," Ryan said quietly. "But we'll stay." Victoria's eyebrow lifted slightly, the look of someone accustomed to being listened to when they gave suggestions. "I'm not sure you understand." "I understand perfectly." Ryan checked his watch, a plain digital thing that had probably cost $30. "We're exactly where we're supposed to be at exactly the right time." Derek stepped forward. "Sir, I think what Ms. Sterling is trying to communicate is that this establishment caters to a very particular—" "I know what she's trying to communicate," Ryan said, "and I'm telling you we're not leaving." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Victoria's expression hardened. This was a woman who'd built an empire by knowing exactly when to push and when to walk away. Right now, she was choosing to push. "Let me be more direct," she said. "This is a place of business, not a tourist attraction. If you're not here to make a purchase, a serious purchase, then you're wasting everyone's time." "Including yours?" Ryan asked. "Especially mine." Sophie tugged on Ryan's jacket. "Daddy, maybe we should—" "It's okay, sweetheart," Ryan said softly. Then he looked back at Victoria. "We'll wait." "For what exactly?" "You'll see." Something in the way he said it made Victoria pause just for a second. There was no anger in his voice, no defensiveness, just absolute certainty. But the moment passed. Victoria shook her head slightly, the gesture of someone dismissing an irrelevant distraction, and turned back to Derek. "Are the papers ready?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. Right this way." As they walked back toward the office, Victoria said something under her breath that Ryan wasn't meant to hear, but he did anyway. "Some people just don't know when they're out of their depth." Laughter followed her. Not from Derek, he was too professional for that, but from one of the other salespeople. A woman in her 40s with a sharp suit and sharper smile. Sophie looked up at her father. Why was she so mean? Ryan knelt down so he was at eye level with his daughter. He brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "Some people judge books by their covers, sweetheart. They see the outside and think they know the whole story." "But that's not fair." "No," Ryan agreed. "It's not." "Are we really supposed to be here?" Ryan smiled. The kind of smile that held secrets and sadness, and something that looked a lot like patience tested over years. "Yes, we are. I promise." Sophie seemed to accept this. She always trusted her father, even when the world didn't make sense. "Can I sit down? My feet hurt." "Of course." Ryan guided her to one of the leather chairs near the display window. She climbed up, her rabbit in her lap, and started humming quietly to herself. Ryan remained standing, watching, waiting. Across the showroom, Victoria signed papers with the kind of focused efficiency that suggested she'd done this 1,000 times. Derek hovered. The other employees pretended to work while stealing glances at the strange man who refused to leave. Nobody noticed when Ryan pulled out his phone and sent a single text message. Nobody noticed when he received a reply 30 seconds later, and nobody noticed the slight change in his expression when he read it. But they were about to. Derek's phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. Victoria was asking about insurance transfers and he needed to stay focused, but it buzzed again and again. "Excuse me for one moment," Derek said, stepping away to check the screen. His face went pale. "Is something wrong?" Victoria asked, not looking up from the papers. No, I'm sure it's nothing. Just a moment." Derek walked quickly toward his office, his phone already pressed to his ear. Victoria finished signing the last document and set down the pen. "Where's the key fob?" The young salesman, the one who'd tried to get rid of Ryan earlier, appeared with a small velvet box. "Right here, Ms. Sterling." Victoria opened it. Inside was a key fob that looked more like a piece of modern art than a car key. She picked it up, felt the weight of it in her palm, and smiled. The first genuine smile she'd shown since arriving. "Perfect," she said. That's when Derek came back out of his office. His expression had shifted from pale to something worse. He looked like a man who'd just been told his house was on fire and all the exits were locked. "Ms. Sterling," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "I'm terribly sorry, but there's been a development that requires my immediate attention. Would you mind waiting just a few more minutes? I promise this won't take long." Victoria's smile vanished. "I've already waited long enough. The paperwork is signed. I'm taking the vehicle." Of course. It's just that there's a situation with corporate that needs handle it after I leave. I'm afraid I can't." Derek's smile was starting to crack at the edges. Sweat appeared on his upper lip, despite the showroom's perfect climate control. "I've just been informed that we have an audit situation." "An audit?" Victoria's tone sharpened. "Of my purchase?" No, nothing to do with you. It's a broader corporate matter then it's not my problem." Victoria picked up her new key fob in her coat. "Thank you for your service, Derek. I'll be sure to recommend this dealership to my associates." She started walking toward the exit where her new Maybach waited in the private bay. But before she could reach it, the front doors opened and 3 people walked in. 2 men in dark suits carrying leather briefcases. A woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and an expression that suggested she'd seen every possible form of corporate nonsense and was impressed by none of it. Derek's face went from pale to gray. The woman with gray hair looked around the showroom with the systematic efficiency of someone conducting an inventory. Her eyes passed over the cars, the employees, Victoria, and finally landed on Ryan, who was still standing quietly near where Sophie sat. She walked straight to him. "Mr. Mercer," she said. Not a question. A statement. Ryan nodded. "Margaret." "We got your message. The team is ready when you are." The showroom went silent. Derek looked like he might throw up. Victoria stopped walking, turned around. "I'm sorry, what's happening?" Margaret glanced at her with polite disinterest. "Corporate audit. Nothing that concerns active customers. You're free to leave." But Victoria didn't leave. She was too confused. "Who are you?" "Margaret Chen, Chief Financial Officer for Premier Automotive International." She gestured to the two men with her. "These are our forensic accountants." "Forensic?" Derek's voice cracked slightly. "I'm sorry, I think there's been some kind of mistake." "No mistake," Margaret said. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a tablet, then turned it to show Derek the screen. "We've been monitoring irregularities in this location's financial reports for 6 months. Ghost sales, phantom inventory transfers, cash deposits that don't match the books." Derek's face shifted through several shades of red and white. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I'm sure you don't." Margaret's voice was dry as sand. "That's what the next several hours of questioning are for." The other employees had stopped pretending to work. Everyone was staring now. Victoria stood frozen, her new key fob still in her hand, trying to piece together what was happening. Her eyes moved from Margaret to Derek to Ryan, who remained calm and still near the window where Sophie was humming to her rabbit. "I don't understand," Victoria said. "What does any of this have to do with—" She stopped, looked at Ryan again, really looked at him this time. The faded work jacket, the tired eyes, the quiet confidence that never wavered even when she'd humiliated him in front of a room full of strangers. "Margaret called him Mr. Mercer," Victoria said slowly. Margaret glanced at Ryan, a question in her eyes. Ryan gave the smallest nod. "Ryan Mercer," Margaret confirmed. "Majority shareholder of Premier Automotive International, owner of 43 dealerships across 8 states." The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria's face went through a complex series of expressions: confusion, realization, horror, and something that might have been respect if it wasn't buried under humiliation. Derek looked like he might actually faint. The young salesman who'd tried to shoo Ryan away earlier appeared to be contemplating whether the floor might open up and swallow him. Sophie, oblivious to the tension, looked up from her rabbit. "Daddy, are we done waiting?" "Almost, sweetheart," Ryan said quietly. Victoria found her voice. "You own this dealership." 48%, Ryan corrected. "Close enough to majority when the other shareholders are properly motivated. And you just stood there while I—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "While you told me I didn't belong here?" Ryan's voice was still calm, still quiet. "Yes, I did." "Why?" "Because I wanted to see what happened when nobody knew who I was." He glanced around the showroom. "I wanted to see how my employees treated people they thought were beneath them." Derek made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "Mr. Mercer, I can explain Can you explain the $3 million missing from inventory accounts?" Margaret asked, not looking up from her tablet. "Can you explain the fake sales reports submitted to corporate every quarter for the last 2 years? Can you explain the cash deposits made to accounts that don't appear anywhere in the official books?" Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. "I didn't think so," Margaret said. She gestured to the 2 forensic accountants. "Gentlemen, let's start with the office computers." They moved past Derek like he was furniture. Ryan finally moved from his position near the window. He walked slowly to the center of the showroom where he could see everyone and everyone could see him. "I bought into this company 7 years ago," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Everyone stopped to listen. "It was bankrupt. Corrupt management had run it into the ground. I could have gutted it, sold the assets, made a quick profit, and moved on." He paused, looking around at the faces watching him. "But I didn't. I rebuilt it. I kept people employed. I gave this place a second chance. His eyes found Derek. And you thanked me by stealing from it. Derek's face crumpled. Mr. Mercer, please, I can make this right. No, Ryan said simply. You can't. But you can choose how this goes from here. You can cooperate with the audit, return what you stole, and maybe, avoid federal charges. Or you can fight it, and I promise you'll lose everything. Derek seemed to age 10 years in 10 seconds. His shoulders slumped. I'll cooperate. Ryan nodded. Smart choice. Then he turned to the other employees, the ones who'd laughed, the ones who'd watched him be humiliated and done nothing. I want to be clear about something, Ryan said. I didn't come here to play games or test your loyalty. I came here because a friend told me something was wrong, and I wanted to see it for myself. He looked at the young salesman. You, what's your name? The salesman looked terrified. Brandon, sir. Brandon Mitchell. You tried to throw me out without even asking what I wanted. Yes, sir. I'm so sorry. Why did you do it? Brandon swallowed hard. Because Derek told me to handle it. And I thought you didn't fit the profile of our usual customers. What profile is that? Rich, Brandon said miserably. Successful. Important. Ryan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'm going to tell you something my father told me when I was about your age. He said the measure of a person isn't how they treat the people above them. It's how they treat the people they think are below them. Brandon nodded, looking at his shoes. You're fired, Ryan said. Brandon's head snapped up. Mr. Mercer, please. I'm joking, Ryan said. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Mostly, you're on probation. You're going to spend the next month working in our service department, learning how the other half lives. If you can last 30 days treating mechanics and technicians with respect, we'll talk about whether you deserve to come back here. Brandon looked like he'd been granted a pardon from execution. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Ryan turned to the woman who'd laughed when Victoria made her comment about the bus station. You. Name. Jennifer Hartley. Her voice was barely a whisper. Do you think this was funny, Jennifer? No, sir. Then why did you laugh? Jennifer's face flushed. I don't know. I wasn't thinking. That's the problem. You weren't thinking. Ryan's voice hardened. You saw a little girl being embarrassed by adults who should have known better, and you laughed. What does that say about you? Jennifer had no answer. I want you to think about that question, Ryan said. Really think about it. And when you have an answer, you can write it in a letter explaining why you deserve to keep working here. If I don't receive it by Friday, I'll assume you've decided you don't. Jennifer nodded, tears starting to form in her eyes. Ryan looked around at the rest of the staff. Anyone else want to contribute to today's lesson? Nobody moved. Good. Ryan pulled out his phone and checked the time. Margaret, how long do you need? 3 hours minimum, Margaret said from Derek's office. Possibly longer depending on what we find. Take all the time you need. I'll be back tomorrow. He turned to leave, then stopped and looked at one more person. The young kid working the coffee station. Couldn't have been more than 19. He'd been quiet all morning, just doing his job, staying out of the drama. You, Ryan said. Coffee station kid. The teenager looked up, eyes wide. Yes, sir? What's your name? Marcus, sir. Marcus Johnson. You helped my daughter earlier. Brought her a hot chocolate without being asked. Marcus looked confused. Yes, sir. She looked cold. Ryan nodded. Starting Monday, you're working sales. $70,000 a year, base plus commission. Margaret will handle the paperwork. Marcus's jaw dropped. Sir, I'm just working here part-time while I'm in college. Now you can afford to finish college without drowning in debt. Ryan's expression softened slightly. Character matters, Marcus. Remember that. Marcus looked like he might cry. Thank you, sir. I won't let you down. I know you won't. Ryan walked back to where Sophie was sitting. She'd fallen asleep in the chair, her rabbit clutched against her chest, her head tilted at an angle that would definitely give her a neckache later. He picked her up gently. She stirred but didn't wake, just pressed her face against his shoulder with a soft sigh. That's when he finally looked at Victoria. She'd been standing there the entire time, frozen, watching everything unfold. The key fob to her brand new custom Maybach was still in her hand, but she seemed to have forgotten about it entirely. "Ms. Sterling," Ryan said quietly. Victoria blinked, as if coming out of a trance. Your car's ready. You're free to go." "I don't—" She shook her head. "I don't understand. Why didn't you say something when you assumed I was nobody?" Ryan shifted Sophie slightly in his arms. "Because people reveal who they are when they think there are no consequences. I needed to see who you really were." Victoria flinched as if he'd slapped her. "And what did you see?" Ryan looked at her for a long moment. His expression was unreadable. "I saw someone who forgot what it's like to be judged by your appearance instead of your accomplishments. I saw someone who built walls so high she can't see over them anymore." "You don't know anything about me," Victoria said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I know you're brilliant. I know you're successful. I know you're respected." Ryan's voice was quiet. "I also know you're alone and scared and hiding it behind cruelty because that's easier than admitting you're human." Victoria's breath caught. Nobody talked to her like this. Nobody dared. "How? Because I've met 100 people like you, and most of them stay that way until something forces them to change. Or someone." He adjusted Sophie in his arms. "I hope you figure out which one you need before it's too late." He started walking toward the exit. Victoria's voice stopped him. "Wait." Ryan turned. Victoria stood there, key fob in hand, expensive coat, perfect hair, everything about her screaming success and power. But her eyes told a different story. "I'm sorry," she said, "for what I said, for how I treated you, for—" She glanced at Sophie, sleeping peacefully in her father's arms. "For humiliating your daughter." Ryan nodded. "I accept your apology." "Just like that?" "Just like that." "Why?" Ryan smiled, sad and knowing. "Because holding grudges is exhausting, Ms. Sterling, and life's too short to waste energy on people who don't matter." He walked out before she could respond. The glass doors closed behind him, and Victoria stood alone in the middle of the showroom, surrounded by luxury vehicles she could afford, and people who respected her title, but not her character. For the first time in years, Victoria Sterling felt small. She looked down at the key fob in her hand. 24 hours ago, this had felt like an achievement. Now it felt hollow. Behind her, Margaret Chen emerged from Derek's office carrying a box of files. "Ms. Sterling, was there something else you needed?" Victoria turned. "The man who just left, Ryan Mercer. What's his story?" Margaret's expression shifted to something that might have been respect. "You mean besides being a self-made millionaire who rebuilt a failing company through integrity and hard work?" "Yes, besides that." Margaret set down the box. "He lost his wife 3 years ago, cancer. Spent everything they had trying to save her. When she died, he was left with nothing but debt and a 4-year-old daughter." She paused. "Most people would have given up, declared bankruptcy, started over. Ryan didn't. He worked 3 jobs, slept 4 hours a night, and climbed back from nothing because he'd promised his wife he'd give Sophie the life they'd dreamed of." Victoria's throat tightened. "He made his first million 2 years later," Margaret continued. "Not through luck, through relentless work and refusing to compromise his principles, even when it would have been easier." She picked up the box again. "He's the best man I've ever worked for, and I've worked for a lot of men." Margaret walked away, leaving Victoria alone with her expensive car and her expensive life, and the sudden, crushing realization that she'd become exactly the kind of person she used to hate. Outside, Ryan buckled Sophie into her car seat in his 10-year-old Honda Civic. The car had 140,000 miles on it and a scratch on the passenger door from a shopping cart, but it was paid off, and it ran well, and it was enough. Sophie stirred as he clicked her seatbelt into place. "Daddy?" "Yeah, sweetheart." "Did we get to see the pretty car?" Ryan kissed her forehead. "We saw lots of pretty cars." "Good." She yawned, her rabbit squished against her cheek. "I like our car better anyway. It smells like us." Ryan smiled. "Yeah, it does." He closed her door gently and walked around to the driver's side. Before getting in, he looked back at the showroom. Through the glass, he could see Victoria still standing there staring at nothing. Part of him felt sorry for her. Part of him hoped she'd learn something from today. Most of him just wanted to get Sophie home in time for lunch. He got in the car and drove away, leaving Premier Automotive and its expensive vehicles and its complicated people behind. Inside the showroom, Victoria finally moved. She walked to the private bay where her new Maybach waited. The car was perfect, exactly as she'd specified. Beautiful, powerful, hers. She got in, started the engine, and drove it out into the Chicago afternoon. And for the first time in her life, Victoria Sterling realized that having everything she wanted didn't mean she had anything that mattered. Victoria sat in her new Maybach for 20 minutes before she realized she hadn't turned the engine off. The interior smelled like expensive leather and new car and money, the kind of smell that used to make her feel accomplished. Now it just made her feel empty. Her phone buzzed. 3 texts from her assistant, 2 emails marked urgent, a calendar reminder about the board meeting scheduled for 4 o'clock. The board meeting. She'd forgotten about it completely. Or maybe her brain had shoved it aside because acknowledging it meant acknowledging that in less than 6 hours, everything she'd built over the past decade might collapse. Victoria turned off the engine. The silence that followed felt suffocating. Through the windshield, she could see Margaret Chen directing the forensic accountants like a general commanding troops. Derek sat in his office with his head in his hands. The other employees moved carefully, quietly, like people trying not to draw attention to themselves in a minefield. And somewhere out there in the city, Ryan Mercer was probably making lunch for his daughter, completely unbothered by the chaos he'd left behind. Victoria pulled out her phone and typed his name into Google. The first result was a Forbes article from 18 months ago, Ryan Mercer, the turnaround specialist who works in shadows. She clicked it. The article detailed his business history, how he'd built a reputation for buying failing companies, restructuring them, and making them profitable again. But what caught her attention was a quote near the end. "I don't do this for recognition," Mercer had told the reporter. "I do it because I know what it's like to lose everything. And I know what it's like to rebuild from nothing. If I can give other people that second chance, then the work matters." Victoria kept scrolling, found an older article from a Chicago Tribune business section. This one had a photo. Ryan standing outside a factory he'd just purchased, wearing the same kind of work jacket he'd worn today, the same tired eyes. But in the photo, he was smiling, really smiling. The caption read, "Mercer Industries CEO, Ryan Mercer celebrates saving 400 jobs at manufacturing plant." 400 jobs, 400 families. She'd never thought about business that way. For Victoria, success meant quarterly earnings and shareholder value and market dominance. People were resources, assets to be managed. When had she started thinking like that? Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. Her assistant, Patricia. Victoria answered. "What is it?" "Ms. Sterling, I've been trying to reach you. The board members have been calling all morning. They're asking if you've prepared your defense for the meeting." Victoria closed her eyes. "I'm working on it. They're also asking about the Marcus situation." "What Marcus situation?" Patricia's voice dropped. "The lawsuit? The whistleblower complaint. You haven't seen it?" Something cold settled in Victoria's chest. "Send me everything." "I emailed it an hour ago. Send it again." She hung up before Patricia could respond. The email arrived 30 seconds later. Victoria opened it, and her stomach dropped. Marcus Chen, a former senior analyst at Sterling Industries, had filed a formal complaint with the Securities and Exchange Commission alleging that Victoria had knowingly falsified revenue projections to inflate stock prices. The complaint included emails, internal memos, and recorded phone conversations. Victoria's hand started shaking. She scrolled through the attached documents. Most of them were real. A few had been taken out of context, but the damage was done. Even if she could prove her innocence, and she wasn't entirely sure she could, the investigation alone would destroy her credibility. The board meeting wasn't about her leadership anymore. It was about whether she'd survive the week. Her phone rang again. This time it was David Thornton, the board chairman and the man who'd mentored her when she first started Sterling Industries. Victoria stared at his name on the screen for 3 rings before answering. "David?" "Victoria." His voice sounded old, tired, disappointed. "Tell me the allegations aren't true." "They're not." "Then explain the emails." Victoria pinched the bridge of her nose. The emails were internal strategy discussions. Marcus is twisting them to make it look like fraud. "Are you certain about that?" Am I certain that I didn't commit securities fraud? Victoria's voice sharpened. Yes, David, I'm certain. Silence on the other end. Then, the board wants you to step down voluntarily before the meeting. Absolutely not. Victoria, this is about damage control, okay? This is about cowards protecting themselves, Victoria snapped. I built this company from nothing. I've delivered record profits for 6 consecutive quarters, and the second there's controversy, everyone wants to throw me to the wolves. That's not fair. Isn't it? Victoria was surprised by how angry she sounded, how raw. You taught me that business was war, David. You told me never to show weakness, never to apologize, never to let anyone see you bleed. And I learned. I became exactly what you wanted me to become. So don't act surprised when I refuse to surrender. Another silence, longer this time. The meeting is at 4, David finally said. I suggest you come prepared. He hung up. Victoria sat in her expensive car in the parking lot of a luxury dealership and realized she had nowhere to go. Her office was full of people who were probably already planning their own survival strategies. Her apartment was empty except for furniture chosen by an interior designer she'd met once. Her friends were business associates who'd drop her the second she stopped being useful. She was alone. Completely, utterly alone. And the only person who'd been honest with her today was a man she'd humiliated in front of strangers. Victoria started the engine and drove. She didn't have a destination in mind. Just drove through Chicago's afternoon traffic, letting muscle memory guide her through streets she'd traveled 1,000 times. Past the office buildings where she'd closed deals, past the restaurants where she'd entertained clients, past the coffee shop where she used to meet David back when she was young and hungry and convinced she could change the world. When had that changed? When had she stopped wanting to change the world and started wanting to own it? She found herself pulling into a parking garage downtown, took the elevator to the 7th floor without really thinking about why, walked down a hallway that smelled like floor polish and recycled air until she reached a door marked Mercer Industries, private office. Victoria stood outside the door for a full minute before knocking. No answer. She knocked again. Still nothing. Of course he wasn't here. He was with his daughter, being a father, living a life that didn't revolve around office hours and board meetings, and proving his worth to people who didn't matter. Victoria turned to leave. The door opened. Margaret Chen stood in the doorway, reading glasses perched on her nose, looking surprised. Miss Sterling? I was looking for Ryan Mercer. He's not here. I see that. Victoria shifted uncomfortably. Do you know when he'll be back? Margaret studied her for a moment, the kind of look that felt like it was measuring more than just the question being asked. He doesn't keep regular hours. This is just a satellite office he uses for meetings. His real headquarters is across town. Oh. Victoria felt stupid standing there. I'll try there. May I ask what this is about? Victoria opened her mouth to give some professional answer about business inquiries or consulting opportunities. But something in Margaret's expression, something that reminded her of the way Ryan had looked at her in the showroom, made her tell the truth. I wanted to apologize, Victoria said quietly. Properly. Margaret's expression softened slightly. He doesn't hold grudges if that's what you're worried about. That's what he said. Then why apologize? Because I do. Victoria looked down at her expensive shoes. Hold grudges, I mean. Against other people, against myself. I don't know how to just let things go. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she stepped back from the door. Come in. Victoria hesitated. I don't want to bother you. You already bothered me by knocking. Might as well follow through. The office was smaller than Victoria expected. Clean but not fancy. There was a desk with a computer, a few filing cabinets, a couch that looked like it had been used for more naps than client meetings. The walls were covered with photos, not of buildings or products or achievements, just people. Employees at company picnics, ribbon-cutting ceremonies at factories, a group photo from what looked like a retirement party, and in the corner, on a small side table, there was a framed photo of Ryan with a woman and a very young Sophie. The woman was beautiful, laughing at something off camera. Ryan's arm was around her shoulders, and he looked happier than Victoria had ever seen any human being look. That's Catherine, Margaret said, following Victoria's gaze. Ryan's wife. She's beautiful. She was brilliant too. Architect. Designed half the affordable housing projects on the South Side. Margaret sat down behind the desk. She was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer 6 months after Sophie was born. Doctors gave her 2 years. She fought for 4. Victoria felt something crack in her chest. I didn't know. Most people don't. Ryan doesn't talk about it much. Margaret pulled off her reading glasses. He used every penny they had trying to save her. Experimental treatments, clinical trials, specialists in 3 different countries. Nothing worked. By the time Catherine died, Ryan had medical debt in the 7 figures and a daughter who'd just turned 4. How did he rebuild? Margaret smiled grimly. The same way anyone rebuilds, one day at a time. He sold everything except the house. Catherine loved that house, wanted Sophie to grow up there. Worked as a construction manager during the day, did consulting work at night, drove for a rideshare service on weekends, slept in his car between shifts so he wouldn't waste time commuting. Victoria sat down on the couch without being invited. Her legs felt weak. 2 years later, he had enough saved to make his first investment, Margaret continued. A small manufacturing plant that was about to go under. Everyone told him he was crazy. The plant was losing money, the equipment was outdated, the workforce was demoralized. But Ryan saw something nobody else did. What? People who cared about their work. People who just needed someone to believe in them. Margaret leaned back in her chair. He bought the plant, invested in new equipment, gave the workers profit-sharing stakes. Within 18 months, it was profitable. Within 3 years, it was thriving. And he kept going. He kept going, not because he wanted to be rich, because he'd learned something when Catherine was dying. He'd learned that the world is full of broken things that people give up on too easily. Companies, relationships, people. Margaret's eyes met Victoria's. He made it his mission to prove that broken things can be fixed if someone's willing to do the work. Victoria's throat felt tight. Why are you telling me this? Because Ryan won't. He doesn't believe in using his tragedy to make people feel sorry for him. Margaret put her glasses back on. But I think you need to understand who you insulted today. Not because you owe him something, because you owe yourself the truth. What truth? That you've become the kind of person who judges people by their appearance instead of their character. And somewhere deep down, you know that's wrong. Victoria flinched. You don't know anything about me. I know you're here, instead of preparing for a board meeting that could end your career. Margaret's voice wasn't unkind, just factual. I know you drove across town to apologize to a man you'll probably never see again. That suggests you're at least trying to be better than you were this morning. Victoria stood up. I should go. Miss Sterling. Victoria stopped at the door. The board meeting, Margaret said. What's it about? Victoria turned around slowly. How did you know about that? I didn't until just now. But you have that look. The one people get when they're about to lose everything and don't know how to stop it. Victoria's shoulders sagged. One of my former employees filed a whistleblower complaint. He's alleging securities fraud. The board wants me to resign before the investigation becomes public. Are the allegations true? No. Victoria's voice was firm. But that doesn't matter anymore. The damage is done. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she opened a drawer in the desk and pulled out a business card. What time is the meeting? 4 o'clock. Where? Sterling Industries headquarters, conference room A. Victoria took the card. It was Ryan's business card. Plain white cardstock with just his name, phone number, and email. No fancy title, no corporate logo. Why? Because Ryan has experience dealing with board coups and corporate investigations. And because he's helped more people than you can imagine survive situations exactly like yours. Why would he help me? Victoria's voice broke slightly. I treated him like garbage. Margaret smiled, sad and knowing. Because that's what he does. He helps broken things. Victoria looked down at the card in her hand. The paper felt ordinary, nothing special about it, but it felt heavier than it should have. I don't deserve his help, Victoria said quietly. Probably not, Margaret agreed. But that's never stopped him before. Victoria walked out of the office without saying goodbye. She made it to the elevator before the tears started. She pressed the button for the parking garage and leaned against the elevator wall, letting herself cry for the first time in years. The elevator doors opened on the third floor. A young couple got on, saw Victoria crying, and immediately looked away, pretending not to notice, giving her the privacy of anonymity. Victoria almost laughed. Here she was, one of the most powerful women in Chicago, crying in a parking garage elevator while strangers pretended she didn't exist. She'd become invisible, not because of what she'd lost, but because of what she'd never let anyone see. The elevator reached the parking level. Victoria wiped her eyes, straightened her shoulders, and walked to her car. She sat in the driver's seat for a long time, staring at Ryan's business card. Then she pulled out her phone and dialed the number. It rang 4 times. Victoria almost hung up. Then a voice answered. "Hello?" Not Ryan. A child's voice. Victoria's breath caught. Is Sophie there?" "This is Sophie," the little girl said seriously. "Who's this?" Victoria closed her eyes. "My name is Victoria. I met you and your dad this morning." Silence on the other end. Then, "You were the mean lady at the car place." "Yes," Victoria's voice cracked. "I was the mean lady." "Why were you mean?" "I don't know, sweetheart. I think I forgot how to be nice." Sophie was quiet for a moment. Victoria heard rustling, like the phone was being moved. "Daddy says people are mean when they're hurting inside," Sophie said finally. "Are you hurting inside?" Victoria pressed her hand against her mouth to keep from sobbing. "Yes." "Do you need a hug?" Victoria couldn't speak. More rustling, then Ryan's voice. "Sophie, who are you talking to?" "The mean lady from the car place. She's hurting inside. I asked if she needed a hug." A pause. Then Ryan said something too quiet for Victoria to hear. The phone rustled again. "Hello?" Ryan's voice was cautious. "Mr. Mercer." Victoria forced herself to sound professional. "I apologize for calling. Your colleague Margaret gave me your card. I didn't realize your daughter would answer." "It's fine. She likes answering the phone. Makes her feel important." Ryan's tone was carefully neutral. "What can I do for you, Ms. Sterling?" "I wanted to apologize again, for this morning, for how I treated you and Sophie." "You already apologized." "I know, but I needed to hear myself say it again." Victoria took a shaky breath. "And I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to meet with me, before my board meeting. Margaret suggested you might be able to offer some guidance." Silence on Ryan's end. Victoria could hear Sophie in the background asking if they were having grilled cheese for lunch. "What time is your meeting?" Ryan asked. 4 o'clock. "Where?" "Sterling Industries, downtown office." Another pause. "I'll meet you at 2:30, conference room lobby." "Thank you." But Ryan had already hung up. Victoria sat in her car, staring at her phone, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. It was a small, fragile thing, easily crushed, but it was there. She started the car and drove to her office. She had 3 hours to prepare. 3 hours to figure out how to defend herself against allegations that were technically false but emotionally true. Because the hard part wasn't proving she hadn't committed fraud. The hard part was proving she deserved to lead a company when she'd forgotten how to lead herself. Victoria's office building was 60 stories of glass and steel, the kind of architectural statement that screamed success to anyone looking at the skyline. She'd bought the top 3 floors 5 years ago when Sterling Industries went public. Back then, it had felt like a victory. Now it felt like a monument to something hollow. Her assistant Patricia stood up the second Victoria walked into the executive suite. "Miss Sterling, thank goodness, the board members have been—" "I know." Victoria didn't slow down. "Conference room A230. I'll have someone with me." "Who?" "A consultant." Patricia followed her into the office. "Ms. Sterling, the legal team has been trying to reach you. They say you need to review the defense strategy before— Tell them I'll review it at 2. Victoria dropped her purse on her desk and finally looked at Patricia. Really looked at her. "How long have you worked for me?" Patricia blinked, confused by the question. 4 years. "Do you like working here?" Yes. Of course." "Why?" Patricia looked genuinely uncertain about how to answer. "It's a good position. The pay is excellent. The benefits— That's not what I asked." Victoria sat down. "Do you like working for me?" Patricia's expression shifted. She glanced at the door as if checking whether anyone was listening. You're demanding, sometimes unreasonable. You expect perfection and get angry when you don't receive it. I'm an awful boss. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Victoria pulled up the SEC complaint on her computer. Patricia, if I asked you to testify about my character in front of the board, what would you say? Patricia was quiet for a long moment. I'd say you're brilliant, ruthless when you need to be, and terrified of being seen as weak. Victoria looked up sharply. Excuse me? You asked what I'd say, Patricia said calmly. That's the truth. You're brilliant. You've built something remarkable. But you're so afraid of failing that you've forgotten how to be human. I'm human enough. Are you? Patricia crossed her arms. When's the last time you asked anyone here how they're doing? When's the last time you had a conversation that wasn't about work? When's the last time you went home before midnight? Victoria didn't answer. That's what I thought, Patricia said. She walked to the door, then stopped. For what it's worth, Ms. Sterling, I hope you win today. Not because I like this job, but because somewhere under all the armor, I think you're still a good person. You've just forgotten what that looks like. She left Victoria alone in the office. Victoria stared at her computer screen. The SEC complaint stared back. Pages of accusations and evidence and legal language that all added up to one simple message. Victoria Sterling had prioritized profits over people, and now people were fighting back. She spent the next 90 minutes reviewing documents, making notes, building her defense. But the more she read, the more she realized Patricia was right. She hadn't committed securities fraud, but she'd committed something worse. She'd stopped caring. At 2:15, Victoria took the elevator down to the conference room level. The lobby was empty except for a security guard who nodded politely as she passed. Victoria sat in one of the leather chairs and waited. At exactly 2:30, the elevator doors opened. Ryan Mercer stepped out, wearing the same faded work jacket from this morning. He'd changed his shirt, but still looked like someone who'd rather be anywhere else. No briefcase, no files, just a man who'd shown up because he'd said he would. Victoria stood. Mr. Mercer, thank you for coming. Ryan nodded. You've got an hour before the board meeting. We should get started. Do you want to see the complaint, the evidence, the board members' statements? No. Victoria frowned. Then how are you supposed to help me? By asking you one question. Ryan's eyes were steady, calm. Do you want to win this fight because you deserve to, or because losing scares you? Victoria opened her mouth, closed it. I don't understand the question. Yes, you do. Ryan sat down in one of the chairs. You've spent the last 3 hours preparing a defense, lining up facts and arguments and legal strategies, but none of that matters if you can't answer the real question. Which is, are you the leader this company needs, or are you just the person who's held the title the longest? Victoria felt like she'd been punched. That's not fair. Fair doesn't matter. True matters. Ryan leaned forward. I've seen 100 executives in your position. Most of them fight because they can't imagine life without the power. A few fight because they genuinely believe they're the best person for the job. Which one are you? Victoria sat down across from him. Her hands were shaking. I don't know anymore. Then figure it out. You've got 45 minutes. They sat in silence. Victoria stared at the floor, at her expensive shoes that had walked through corridors of power for a decade, at her hands that had signed contracts worth billions, at the reflection of herself in the polished table surface that showed someone she barely recognized. I wanted to change the world, she said finally. When I started this company, I wanted to prove that a woman could build something that mattered, that I could succeed without compromising who I was. Did you? Succeed? Yes. Keep who I was? Victoria's laugh was bitter. No. I became exactly what I needed to be to survive. Ruthless, calculating, cold. Why? Because the alternative was being dismissed, being underestimated, being told I didn't belong in rooms full of men who thought they owned the world. Victoria looked up. I learned to be scarier than them, smarter than them, more willing to do whatever it took to win. And it worked. It worked. Victoria's voice was hollow. I built an empire, and I killed myself to do it. Ryan was quiet for a moment. Do you remember why you started this company? The real reason? Victoria closed her eyes. I wanted to create jobs, economic opportunities in communities that had been forgotten. I wanted to prove that businesses could be profitable and ethical at the same time. What happened to that person? She grew up, realized the world doesn't reward idealism. Doesn't it? Ryan's voice was soft. Or did you just stop believing in the possibility? Victoria opened her eyes. You don't understand what it's like. The pressure, the constant scrutiny. One mistake and everyone's waiting to watch you fall. You're right, Ryan said. I don't understand what it's like to be you, but I understand what it's like to rebuild your life from nothing. And I can tell you that the person who does that successfully isn't the one who never falls. It's the one who remembers why they're standing up in the first place. I don't know if I remember anymore. Then don't go to the meeting. Victoria stared at him. What? If you can't answer why you deserve to lead this company, then resign. Let the board appoint someone else. Walk away and find something that actually matters to you. I can't just walk away. Why not? Ryan's voice was calm, curious. What's the worst that happens? You lose your title, your power, your reputation. Yes, all of that. And then what? You disappear? You stop existing? Ryan shook his head. Or you finally figure out who you are when nobody's watching. Victoria felt tears building again. I've spent my entire adult life building this company. I know. And it might be time to ask yourself if you built it for the right reasons, or if you're just too afraid to let it go. The silence between them felt enormous. Victoria looked at her watch. 30 minutes until the board meeting. 30 minutes to decide whether to fight or surrender. 30 minutes to choose between the person she'd become and the person she might still be able to be. If I go to that meeting, Victoria said slowly, and I fight to keep my position, what do I say? Ryan met her eyes. The truth about who you've been, who you want to be, and what you're willing to change to get there. What if that's not enough? Then at least you'll know you were honest. Ryan stood up. The board isn't going to fire you because of one whistleblower complaint, Ms. Sterling. They're going to fire you because they've lost faith in your leadership. The only way to win them back is to show them the leader they hired in the first place. I don't know if that person still exists. Then this meeting is about to tell you whether she does. Ryan walked toward the elevator. Victoria stood up, her heart hammering. Why did you come here? She asked. Why help me after what I did? Ryan stopped, turned around. Because my wife used to say that everyone deserves a chance to become who they're meant to be, even people who don't believe they deserve it. The elevator doors opened. Ryan stepped inside. Mr. Mercer. He held the door. Yes? Thank you. Ryan nodded. The doors closed. And Victoria stood alone in the conference room lobby, 28 minutes away from the most important meeting of her life, finally understanding what was at stake. Not her company. Her soul. Victoria took the elevator to the 58th floor, watching the numbers climb while her stomach twisted itself into knots. 26 minutes. She had 26 minutes to figure out who she was and whether that person deserved to survive what was coming. The executive floor was quieter than usual. People saw her coming and suddenly found urgent reasons to be somewhere else. Victoria had seen this before. The slow retreat of colleagues when someone was about to fall, like watching rats abandon a ship they'd happily sailed on when the weather was good. Patricia was waiting outside conference room A with a tablet and an expression that tried to be neutral but didn't quite make it. They're already inside, all 12 board members, plus legal counsel. Who else? Marcus Chen, the whistleblower, his attorney, and 2 representatives from the SEC. Patricia's voice dropped. Ms. Sterling, they're not here to listen. They're here to watch you resign. Victoria straightened her shoulders. Then they're going to be disappointed. She pushed open the conference room doors before she could change her mind. 12 faces turned toward her. Some she'd worked with for years. Others had been appointed recently, brought in by investors who wanted fresh blood and new perspectives. David Thornton sat at the head of the table, looking older than he had 6 months ago. Grayer, more tired. And sitting beside the SEC representatives, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Victoria's first car, was Marcus Chen. 28 years old, brilliant, and looking at her with an expression that mixed triumph with something that might have been regret. Victoria took the empty seat at the opposite end of the table from David. Nobody spoke. The silence felt like a held breath. David cleared his throat. Victoria, thank you for coming. Did I have a choice? We always have choices. David folded his hands on the table. The question is whether we make them before they're made for us. Victoria met his eyes. You want me to resign? We want to understand what happened, the allegations, the emails, the revenue projections that Marcus claims were falsified. David glanced at the SEC representatives. We want the truth. The truth is that I didn't commit securities fraud. Marcus leaned forward. Then explain the email from March 14th where you told your CFO to massage the numbers until they look better. Victoria's jaw tightened. That email was about quarterly projections, internal forecasting, not public reporting. The line between the two seems awfully thin, Marcus said. The line exists, and I never crossed it. One of the board members, a woman named Sarah Reeves, who'd made her fortune in tech, spoke up. Ms. Sterling, I think we're all aware that technically you may not have broken any laws, but this isn't just about legality. It's about leadership, trust, the culture you've created here. Victoria turned to look at her. What culture is that? One where winning matters more than how you win, where employees feel pressured to deliver results regardless of the cost. Sarah's voice was calm but firm. Marcus isn't the first person to complain about the environment here. He's just the first one to go public with it. People complain when they're asked to work hard. No, Sarah said. People complain when they're asked to compromise their integrity. There's a difference. Victoria felt something crack inside her chest. I built this company. You did, David interrupted, and you built it brilliantly. But somewhere along the way, you forgot that companies are made of people. Not assets, not resources. People. I never forgot that. Didn't you? Marcus's voice was quiet now, less triumphant. When I came to you 9 months ago and told you I was uncomfortable with the way we were reporting deferred revenue, what did you say? Victoria remembered. Remembered Marcus standing in her office, young and earnest and worried. Remembered her own response. I told you to trust the process, Victoria said slowly. You told me that if I couldn't handle the pressure, I should find somewhere else to work. Marcus's expression was pained. You told me that questioning leadership decisions was a sign of weakness. I didn't mean... It doesn't matter what you meant. It matters what I heard. What dozens of other employees heard when they tried to raise concerns. Marcus looked around the table. I didn't file this complaint because I want to destroy Sterling Industries. I filed it because I want to save it from becoming the kind of place where people are afraid to tell the truth. The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to defend herself, to explain, to justify. But Ryan's voice echoed in her head. The truth. About who you've been, who you want to be. Victoria closed her mouth, took a breath, let the silence settle before she spoke again. Marcus is right, she said finally. Every head in the room turned to stare at her. I created a culture of fear, not intentionally, not maliciously, but I did it. Victoria's hands were shaking slightly. She pressed them flat against the table. I was so focused on proving that I belonged here, that I deserved to lead this company, that I forgot to ask whether I was leading it well. David's expression shifted. Victoria, let me finish. Victoria looked around the table. When I started Sterling Industries, I had a vision, create jobs, build economic opportunities, prove that businesses could be profitable without being predatory. And for the first few years, that's what we did. We grew carefully, ethically. We treated people like they mattered. What changed? Sarah asked. Victoria was quiet for a moment. I did. We went public. Suddenly I wasn't just answerable to employees and customers. I was answerable to shareholders who wanted quarterly growth, to analysts who punished any sign of weakness, to board members who started every meeting by asking why we weren't growing faster. She looked at David. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. I convinced myself that the only way to survive was to be harder, tougher, more ruthless than everyone else in the room. Victoria's voice cracked slightly. I stopped asking whether decisions were right. I only asked whether they were profitable. And I surrounded myself with people who wouldn't question that logic. That's not entirely true. Patricia's voice came from the doorway. Everyone turned. Victoria's assistant stood there with a folder in her hands, looking nervous but determined. I'm sorry, I know I'm not supposed to be in here, but there's something the board needs to see. David frowned. Patricia, this is a closed meeting. I know, but Miss Sterling isn't the only one who's been working here for the past decade. Patricia walked to the table and opened the folder. These are internal memos from the past 5 years. Performance reviews, employee surveys, exit interview transcripts. She spread the papers across the table. Yes, the culture became more demanding, more pressure-focused. But if you actually read these documents, you'll see something else. Patricia pointed to a performance review. Ms. Sterling personally mentored 15 junior employees over the past 3 years. She funded professional development programs when the budget didn't support them. She fought to keep benefits packages when investors wanted cuts. Marcus looked at the papers with confusion. I never saw any of this. Because you were in finance. You saw the numbers and the pressure to deliver them. Patricia pulled out another document. But in operations, Ms. Sterling pushed back against a supplier who was using child labor. Cost us $1 million to switch to an ethical alternative. In HR, she implemented paid parental leave before it was legally required. In community development, that's enough, Patricia, Victoria said quietly. No, it's not. Patricia's voice was firm. You're in here letting them crucify you, and you're not even defending the good things you've done. You're not perfect, Ms. Sterling, but you're not the monster Marcus's complaint makes you out to be either. Sarah picked up one of the employee surveys, scanned it. Her eyebrows rose. This is from 6 months ago. 83% of employees said they were proud to work here. 79% said they felt the company cared about ethical business practices. Those numbers are company-wide, Marcus said. In my department, the culture was different. Because I put the wrong person in charge of finance, Victoria said. Someone who thought the way I used to think, that numbers mattered more than people. She looked at Marcus. I'm sorry for dismissing your concerns, for making you feel like speaking up was a liability instead of an asset. Marcus didn't respond, just stared at the table. One of the other board members, an older man named Robert Chen, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. Ms. Sterling, these documents suggest a more complex picture than we've been presented, but they don't change the fundamental question. Marcus filed a whistleblower complaint with the SEC. Whether the allegations are true or not, the investigation will damage the company's reputation. Our stock price has already dropped 4% since the news leaked this morning. I know, Victoria said. So what do you propose we do? Victoria took a deep breath. This was it. The moment where she either fought for her position or walked away. Where she chose between who she'd been and who she wanted to be. I propose we cooperate fully with the investigation. Provide complete transparency. No hidden documents, no legal stonewalling. We prove that we have nothing to hide. Victoria's voice was steady now. And I propose that we use this as an opportunity to rebuild the culture we've lost. Starting with me. What does that mean? David asked. It means I stop defending decisions based solely on whether they're legally permissible. I start asking whether they're right. Victoria looked around the table. It means I listen when employees raise concerns instead of treating them like obstacles. It means I remember why I started this company in the first place. Sarah leaned back in her chair. That's a nice speech, Victoria, but talk is easy. How do we know you'll actually follow through? You don't, Victoria admitted. You'll have to trust me, or you'll have to replace me. Either way, I'm not resigning today. The room went quiet again. David looked at the SEC representatives. Gentlemen, could you give us the room? We need to discuss this as a board. The two men nodded and filed out. Marcus hesitated, then followed them. When the door closed, David turned back to Victoria. You've put us in an impossible position. I've put myself in an impossible position, Victoria corrected. You're just trying to figure out how to minimize the damage. That's our job, Robert said. Then do your job. Vote. Either you trust me to fix what I've broken, or you don't. Victoria stood up. But I'm not resigning to make your lives easier. If you want me gone, you'll have to fire me. She walked to the door. Victoria, David's voice stopped her. Why now? Why choose today to suddenly care about doing things right? Victoria turned around. Because this morning I humiliated a single father in front of his 6-year-old daughter. And when I found out he was one of the most successful businessmen in Chicago, my first instinct wasn't shame about how I'd treated him. It was relief that I hadn't known who he was when I did it. She paused, letting that sink in. That's when I realized I'd become someone I didn't recognize. someone who measured people's worth by their power instead of their character. Victoria's eyes met David's. You taught me to be ruthless, to never show weakness, to treat business like war. And I learned, maybe too well, but I'm done being that person, whether I keep this job or not. She left before anyone could respond. Patricia was waiting in the hallway. That was either very brave or very stupid. Probably both. Victoria's legs felt shaky. Adrenaline was draining out of her system, leaving her exhausted. How long do you think they'll deliberate? Could be 10 minutes, could be 3 hours. Patricia handed her a bottle of water. You should sit down. You look like you might pass out. Victoria took the water but didn't sit. Patricia, why did you bring those documents in? Because you weren't defending yourself. And someone needed to remind them that you're more than your worst qualities. You could get fired for that. Patricia shrugged. If they fire you, I'm leaving anyway. I didn't sign up to work for whoever replaces you. Something in Victoria's chest loosened slightly. You're a better person than I deserve. Yeah, Patricia agreed, but you're starting to realize that, which is progress. They stood in the hallway for 20 minutes, then 40. Other employees passed by, casting curious glances but not stopping to ask questions. Word had spread. Everyone knew the board was deciding Victoria's fate behind closed doors. At the 60-minute mark, the conference room door opened. David stepped out. His expression was unreadable. They want you back inside, he said. Victoria's heart hammered. What's the verdict? Come find out. She followed him back into the conference room. 12 faces looked at her with varying expressions. Some sympathetic, some skeptical. Some just tired. Victoria sat down. Sarah spoke first. We voted 8-4 in favor of keeping you as CEO. Victoria's breath left her in a rush. But, Sarah continued, and Victoria's relief evaporated. There are conditions, non-negotiable conditions. I'm listening. Robert pulled out a document. First, you'll submit to quarterly leadership reviews conducted by an independent consultant. They'll assess your management style, corporate culture, and employee satisfaction. Victoria nodded. Agreed. Second, you'll establish an ethics committee with authority to override your decisions if they violate company values. The committee will include board representatives, senior employees, and outside advisors. Agreed. Third, Sarah said, you'll personally meet with Marcus Chen and his attorney to address his concerns. Not to threaten him, not to buy his silence, to genuinely understand what went wrong and how to fix it. Victoria's jaw tightened, but she nodded. Agreed. David leaned forward. And fourth, you'll make a public statement about the SEC investigation. No spin, no corporate doublespeak, complete transparency about what happened and how you're addressing it. When? Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. press conference. David's expression was serious. This is your chance to show people who you really are, Victoria. Not the image you've cultivated, the real person underneath. If you can't do that, then we made the wrong decision keeping you. Victoria looked around the table. 8 people had voted to give her a second chance. 8 people who could have taken the easy route and cleaned house. But they hadn't. Why? Victoria asked quietly. Why give me another chance when it would be easier to start fresh? Sarah smiled slightly. Because Patricia was right. You're not perfect, but you're also not irredeemable. And because rebuilding something broken is harder than starting over, but it's also more valuable. Victoria felt tears building again. She blinked them back. Thank you. Don't thank us yet, Robert said. You've got 6 months to prove this wasn't a mistake. If the culture doesn't improve, if employees don't feel heard, if we see any sign that you're reverting to old patterns, we'll revisit this decision. Understood. David stood up. Then we're adjourned. Victoria, I'd like a word before you go. The other board members filed out. Sarah touched Victoria's shoulder as she passed, a gesture of support that felt more valuable than anything that had been said aloud. When the room was empty except for Victoria and David, he sat down in the chair beside her instead of across from her. The gesture felt significant. I owe you an apology, David said. Victoria looked at him in surprise. For what? For teaching you all the wrong lessons. David's voice was heavy with something that sounded like regret. When you first came to work for me, you were 22 years old and full of ideas about changing the world. You wanted to build something that mattered, and I taught you to be cynical instead. You taught me to be successful. I taught you to be ruthless, to see people as obstacles or assets, to measure worth in quarterly earnings instead of human impact. David rubbed his face. I thought I was preparing you for reality, but all I did was convince you that caring was weakness. Victoria didn't know what to say. My wife died 2 years ago, David said quietly. Cancer. And I spent her last 6 months working 80-hour weeks because I didn't know how to face losing her. I convinced myself that work mattered more than being present for someone I loved. His voice cracked slightly. She forgave me before she died, told me she understood. But I don't forgive myself. David looked at Victoria. When I heard about your confrontation with Ryan Mercer this morning, I saw myself 30 years ago, measuring people by their appearance, judging them by what they could do for me instead of who they were. David, let me finish. He held up a hand. I voted to keep you as CEO today, not because I think you're perfect, but because I think you're finally learning the lessons I should have taught you from the beginning, that success without integrity is worthless, that power without compassion is poison, that the only thing worth building is something that makes people's lives better. Victoria's throat felt tight. I don't know if I can be that person. Neither do I, David admitted, but I think you're willing to try. And that's more than most people in your position ever do. He stood up, looking older and more tired than Victoria had ever seen him. The press conference tomorrow. Tell them the truth, not the sanitized corporate version. The real, messy human truth about making mistakes and trying to do better. People respect honesty more than perfection. Victoria nodded. David walked to the door, then stopped. One more thing. Ryan Mercer, the man you met this morning. What about him? He owns the building we're sitting in, this office, all 60 stories. David's expression was somewhere between amused and impressed. He's also the largest individual investor in Sterling Industries, has been for 3 years. He never disclosed it because he wanted to see how you ran the company when you didn't know he was watching. Victoria felt the floor drop out from under her. He owns a lot of things, and he's very good at staying invisible. David smiled slightly. I suspect he knew exactly what was going to happen when he walked into that dealership this morning. He's been testing you, Victoria. The question is whether you passed. He left her alone in the conference room. Victoria sat there for a long time, processing everything that had happened. The board vote, David's confession, the revelation about Ryan. Finally, she stood up and walked out. Patricia was still waiting. So? I still have a job for now. That's good news. Is it? Victoria leaned against the wall. I have to give a press conference tomorrow morning. Tell the world that my company is under investigation and it's at least partially my fault. You'll survive. Will I? Patricia looked at her seriously. The Victoria Sterling I've worked for over the past 4 years? No. She wouldn't survive admitting weakness. But the person you've been today, the one who actually listened and took responsibility and stopped hiding behind legal technicalities, that person will be fine. Victoria wanted to believe her. I need to talk to Ryan Mercer. About what? I don't know yet. But I need to thank him for this morning, for this afternoon, for showing me who I'd become. Victoria pulled out her phone and found his number. And I need to ask him a question. What question? Victoria hit dial. The phone rang 3 times before Ryan answered. Ms. Sterling. Mr. Mercer, I hope I'm not interrupting dinner. Sophie's eating mac and cheese and telling me about the frog she found at recess. So yes, you're interrupting, but it's fine. Ryan's voice held a hint of amusement. I assume the meeting went well since you're not calling to yell at me. The meeting went better than expected. I kept my job. Barely. Congratulations. Don't congratulate me yet. I have 6 months to prove I deserve it. Victoria took a breath. David Thornton told me you own my building, and that you're an investor in my company. Silence on the other end. Then, that's not technically a secret. It's public record if you know where to look. Why didn't you tell me this morning? Because it wasn't relevant. You judged me based on my appearance, not my bank account. Telling you who I was would have just proven you were right to do it. Victoria closed her eyes. That's not fair. No, Ryan agreed. But it's true. If I told you I owned the dealership before you humiliated me, would you have apologized because you were wrong or because I had power? I don't know. Exactly. Ryan paused. Is that why you called? To ask why I didn't make your life easier? No. I called to ask you the question you asked me this afternoon. Victoria's voice was quiet. How do you know if you're the leader people need or just the person who's held the title the longest? Ryan was quiet for a long moment. Victoria could hear Sophie in the background asking if she could have more cheese. You don't know, Ryan said finally. Not really. You just keep showing up and doing the work and hoping you're making things better instead of worse. That's not very reassuring. It's not supposed to be reassuring. It's supposed to be honest. Ryan's voice softened slightly. Leadership isn't about being perfect, Ms. Sterling. It's about being willing to admit when you're wrong and do the hard work of becoming better. Most people never get that far. Did you get that far? I'm still trying. Every day. Some days I succeed, some days I fail, but I keep trying because the alternative is giving up and becoming the kind of person who stopped caring. Victoria felt something loosen in her chest. Your wife, Catherine. Margaret told me about her. Did she? I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. Ryan's voice was careful, controlled. Was there something else you needed, Miss Sterling? Yes. Victoria looked down at her expensive shoes, at her reflection in the polished floor. I need to apologize to your daughter, properly, not over the phone, in person. Why? Because she deserves to hear it, and because I need to look her in the eye and admit that I was wrong. Victoria's voice cracked. She told me that people are mean when they're hurting inside, and she was right. I've been hurting for so long, I forgot what it felt like to be kind. The silence that followed felt heavy with things unspoken. Sophie goes to bed at 8, Ryan said finally. But she'd probably like to meet you again, under better circumstances. When? Tomorrow night, 6 o'clock. I'll text you the address. Thank you. Don't thank me, Ms. Sterling. Just show up and be honest. That's all she needs. He hung up before Victoria could respond. Patricia was watching her with a strange expression. You're going to apologize to a 6-year-old? Yes. Why? Victoria thought about Sophie's small voice on the phone asking if she needed a hug, about the way the little girl had looked at the floor when adults laughed at her father, about the stuffed rabbit clutched against a yellow coat. Because she's the only person who's been completely honest with me today, Victoria said, and because I want her to know that adults can admit when they're wrong. Patricia smiled. You're going to be okay, Ms. Sterling. I hope so. Victoria took the elevator down to the parking garage where her new Maybach waited. She got in, started the engine, and sat there in the expensive leather seats that smelled like money and success and everything she'd convinced herself mattered. Then she turned off the engine and pulled out her phone. She scrolled through her contacts until she found a number she hadn't called in 5 years. Her college roommate. The woman who'd been her best friend before Victoria got too busy for friendships that didn't advance her career. The phone rang 4 times. Victoria almost hung up. Hello? Rachel, it's Victoria. Victoria Sterling. Silence. Then, holy shit. I thought you'd forgotten I existed. I did, for a while. Victoria's voice was shaky. I'm sorry. For what? For disappearing. For choosing work over friendship. For becoming someone you wouldn't recognize. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Are you okay? No? Victoria admitted. But I'm trying to be. Do you want to talk about it? Yes, but not on the phone. Can we meet? Somewhere that's not my office or a business dinner? Tomorrow night, Rachel suggested. There's a coffee shop near my place. Nothing fancy, just coffee and conversation. I can't tomorrow. I have to apologize to a 6-year-old. Rachel laughed, actually laughed. That's either a very long story or you finally lost your mind. Probably both. Victoria smiled despite everything. How about the day after? Thursday works, 7 o'clock. I'll text you the address. Thank you, Rachel. Don't thank me yet. You've got 5 years of catching up to do. Rachel's voice softened. But I'm glad you called, Vic. Really glad. They hung up. Victoria sat in her car and cried. Not the quiet, controlled tears she'd allowed herself earlier. Full, ugly, gasping sobs that made her mascara run and her throat burn and her chest ache. She cried for the person she'd been, for the person she'd become, for the years she'd wasted measuring her worth in titles and profits and the respect of people who didn't actually care about her. And when she was done crying, she started the car and drove home to her empty apartment, carrying with her the fragile, terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, she could still become someone worth respecting. Victoria's apartment was exactly what someone would expect from a successful CEO. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, furniture chosen by a designer who'd been paid to make the space look impressive rather than comfortable, art on the walls that cost more than most people's cars. Everything perfect, everything cold. She stood in the kitchen that she barely used and opened the refrigerator. 2 bottles of expensive wine, a container of yogurt that had expired 3 weeks ago. Condiments. Nothing that resembled an actual meal. Victoria closed the refrigerator and ordered takeout from a Thai place that delivered until midnight. While she waited, she sat on her couch that was beautiful but hurt her back and opened her laptop. The press conference was tomorrow at 9. She had 12 hours to figure out what to say. She pulled up a blank document and stared at the cursor blinking on the white screen. Typed a sentence. Deleted it. Typed another. Deleted that too. How did you tell the world you'd been wrong without sounding weak? How did you admit mistakes without destroying the confidence people had in your leadership? The old Victoria would have known exactly what to say. She would have crafted careful statements that acknowledged concerns without accepting blame, would have used corporate language that sounded sincere but meant nothing, would have emerged from the press conference with her armor intact. But that wasn't what David had asked her to do. He'd asked for truth. Messy, human truth. Victoria closed the laptop. The Thai food arrived 40 minutes later. She ate it sitting on her couch, watching the lights of Chicago spread out below her like a galaxy made of electricity and ambition. Somewhere out there, Ryan Mercer was probably reading Sophie a bedtime story, making sure she brushed her teeth, being a father in all the ways that mattered. Victoria tried to remember the last time someone had tucked her in, the last time someone had cared whether she was tired or scared or lonely. Couldn't recall. Maybe that had never been her life. She fell asleep on the couch with the laptop balanced on her knees and the television playing something she wasn't watching. The alarm on her phone woke her at 6. Her neck hurt from the angle she'd been sleeping at. Her makeup was smeared. The Thai food container had tipped over on the coffee table, leaving a small puddle of peanut sauce on the glass surface. Victoria cleaned it up mechanically, then took a shower that lasted until the hot water ran cold. She stood in front of her closet trying to decide what you wore to a press conference where you admitted you'd been a terrible leader. The power suit felt wrong, too aggressive, too much armor. She settled on a navy dress. Simple, professional, human. Patricia met her in the lobby of Sterling Industries at 8:30. The reporters are already setting up. Legal wants to brief you before you go on. No lawyers. Patricia blinked. Ms. Sterling, that's not a good idea. I don't want legal doublespeak. I want to tell the truth. Victoria pressed the elevator button. They can watch, but they don't get to script me. The conference room where they'd set up the press briefing was packed. 20 reporters, cameras, voice recorders, people who made their living asking uncomfortable questions and not accepting easy answers. Victoria's legal team stood in the corner looking nervous. Patricia handed her a bottle of water and a folder containing talking points that Victoria immediately set aside without reading. At exactly 9 o'clock, she walked to the podium. The cameras started flashing immediately. Questions overlapped each other, reporters shouting to be heard over one another. Victoria held up a hand. I'll make a statement first, then I'll take questions. The noise settled to a murmur. Victoria looked down at the blank podium in front of her. No notes, no script, just the truth David had asked for. My name is Victoria Sterling. I'm the CEO of Sterling Industries, and I'm here because one of my employees filed a whistleblower complaint alleging that I pressured staff to falsify revenue projections. Her voice was steady, clear. The SEC is investigating these allegations. I'm cooperating fully with their investigation. The reporters scribbled notes. Cameras kept flashing. I want to be clear about something, Victoria continued. I did not knowingly commit securities fraud, but that's not the same thing as saying I did nothing wrong. Silence now. Everyone listening. I created a culture at Sterling Industries where employees felt pressured to deliver results regardless of the cost, where raising concerns was treated as disloyalty, where success was measured only in quarterly earnings and stock prices. Victoria's hands gripped the edges of the podium. That culture came from me, from my leadership, from my belief that being ruthless was the same thing as being strong. A reporter in the front row raised her hand. Victoria ignored it. Yesterday morning, I humiliated a single father in front of his young daughter because I assumed he didn't belong in a luxury car dealership. I judged him based on his appearance, made cruel comments about bus stations and budget-friendly alternatives. I did it because I'd forgotten how to see people as people instead of as assets or obstacles. More scribbling, more camera flashes. That man turned out to be Ryan Mercer, a business owner who's built his reputation on integrity and treating employees with respect. The kind of leader I used to want to be before I convinced myself that kindness was weakness. Victoria's voice cracked slightly. He could have destroyed me. Could have used his influence to make sure I never worked in this city again. Instead, he helped me understand what I'd become, and he helped me see that I still had a choice about what happens next. A male reporter in the back called out, "Ms. Sterling, are you saying Ryan Mercer influenced the board's decision to keep you as CEO?" "No, I'm saying he influenced my decision to stop lying to myself about who I am." Victoria met the reporter's eyes. "The board voted to give me 6 months to prove I deserve this position. Not because they think I'm perfect, because they think I'm capable of change. Are you?" The question came from a woman Victoria recognized as a business journalist who'd written several critical pieces about Sterling Industries. Victoria was quiet for a moment. "I don't know, but I'm going to try. Because the alternative is giving up and becoming the kind of person who stopped caring about anything except winning." The questions came faster after that. Victoria answered them honestly. Yes, she'd created a toxic culture. Yes, employees had complained. Yes, she'd dismissed those complaints as weakness. No, she didn't have a perfect plan for fixing everything. Yes, she understood if people had lost faith in her leadership. The press conference lasted 45 minutes. When it ended, Victoria's legal team looked like they'd aged 10 years. The lead attorney couldn't seem to find words. "That was completely off script." "I know," Victoria said. "You admitted to creating a toxic work environment. On camera, you acknowledged that employees complained and you ignored them. Do you understand what you've done?" "Yes." Victoria picked up her purse. "I told the truth. Exactly what the board asked me to do." She left before they could argue. Patricia was waiting in the hallway with her phone. Twitter's already exploding. The video's been shared 8,000 times in the past 10 minutes. Saying what? Mixed reactions. Some people think you're brave for being honest. Some think you just committed corporate suicide. Patricia scrolled through her phone. There's a hashtag trending, hashtag Sterling Apology. Most of the comments are actually pretty supportive. Victoria took the phone and read a few tweets. Finally, a CEO who admits they're human instead of hiding behind PR spin. Still don't know if I trust her, but at least she's being real about it. Anyone else crying at work? Just me? Okay then, this is either the most genuine apology I've ever seen or the best acting job in corporate history. Victoria handed the phone back. Time will tell which one it is. Which one is it? The genuine one. Victoria pressed the elevator button. I need to go home. Change. I'm meeting Sophie Mercer at 6 and I can't do it in this dress. The little girl from yesterday? Yes. Patricia smiled slightly. You're really doing this. I'm really doing this. Victoria went home, changed into jeans and a sweater, both of which felt strange because she couldn't remember the last time she'd worn jeans anywhere except the gym. Tried to eat lunch, but couldn't manage more than a few bites of a sandwich. The address Ryan had texted her was in a neighborhood she'd driven through but never stopped in. Middle-class homes with small yards, trees lining the streets, kids' bikes lying in driveways. The kind of place where people knew their neighbors' names. Ryan's house was a 2-story craftsman with blue siding and white trim. The porch had 2 rocking chairs and a small table. There was a tire swing hanging from a tree in the front yard. Victoria sat in her car for 5 minutes, gathering courage. Finally, she got out and walked to the front door, rang the bell. Footsteps inside. The door opened. Ryan stood there in a flannel shirt and jeans, looking tired but calm. Miss Sterling, right on time. Thank you for letting me come.
Thanks, Sophie. She's been excited all day. Ryan stepped back to let her in. Fair warning, she's going to ask you a lot of questions. She's 6. The house inside was nothing like Victoria's apartment. There were toys on the floor, drawings taped to the refrigerator, a stack of library books on the coffee table, a blanket thrown over the back of the couch. It looked lived in, loved in.
Sophie appeared from what looked like the kitchen, still wearing her school uniform, but with paint stains on her hands. The stuffed rabbit was tucked under one arm. You came, Sophie said, her eyes wide. I did. Victoria knelt down so she was at eye level with the little girl. Is it okay if we talk for a minute? Sophie looked at her father. Ryan nodded. I'll be in the kitchen if you need me. He left them alone in the living room. Sophie sat on the couch, her rabbit in her lap. Victoria sat beside her, feeling more nervous than she had at the press conference. I wanted to apologize, Victoria said quietly, for yesterday morning, for the things I said to your dad, for making you feel embarrassed. Sophie was quiet, stroking her rabbit's ear. Daddy said you were having a bad day. I was, but that's not an excuse for being mean. Daddy says everybody has bad days. What matters is what you do after. Victoria smiled despite the tightness in her chest. Your dad is very smart. I know. Sophie looked up at her. Do you still think we don't belong in the car place? No, sweetheart. I never should have thought that. I was wrong to judge your dad based on how he looked instead of who he is. Sophie seemed to consider this. My friend Mia says her mom judges people too, says it's because she's scared. Scared of what? I don't know. But that's what she said. Sophie tilted her head. Are you scared? Victoria felt tears building. Yes, I'm very scared. Of what? Of not being good enough. Of people seeing that I'm not as smart or strong as I pretend to be. Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. Of being alone. Sophie set her rabbit aside and climbed into Victoria's lap, wrapped her small arms around Victoria's neck in a hug that felt like absolution. You don't have to be scared, Sophie said seriously. Everybody's not good enough sometimes. My daddy says that's what makes us human. Victoria hugged the little girl back, tears streaming down her face now. Thank you for forgiving me. It's okay. I forgive people all the time. It's easy when they say sorry for real. They sat like that for a minute. Then Sophie pulled back and looked at Victoria seriously. Do you want to see my room? I have a rock collection. Victoria laughed through her tears. I would love to see your rock collection. Sophie grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the stairs. Ryan appeared from the kitchen, saw them heading up, and just smiled. Sophie's room was exactly what Victoria would have expected. Pink walls covered with crayon drawings, a bed shaped like a castle, shelves full of books and toys, and the promised rock collection spread out on a small desk. This one's quartz, Sophie explained, holding up a white stone. And this one's from the beach. And this one I found in the parking lot at school, but Daddy said it still counts. Victoria examined each rock with appropriate seriousness, while Sophie narrated their histories. After the rocks came the drawings. Sophie pulled out a folder full of crayon artwork and showed Victoria each piece. Families, houses, rainbows. A surprisingly detailed picture of a frog. This one's new, Sophie said, showing Victoria a drawing of what looked like a car dealership. I drew it this morning. The picture showed stick figures, a tall man, a small girl with a rabbit, and off to the side a woman with long hair. That's you, Sophie pointed to the woman. I put you in a different place because you weren't with us yet, but I left a door open. Victoria looked at the drawing more closely. Sure enough, there was a door drawn on one side, leading toward where the man and little girl stood. Why did you leave a door open? Sophie looked at her like the answer was obvious. So you could come in if you wanted to. Everybody needs a door they can walk through. Victoria stared at the drawing, feeling something shift in her chest. This 6-year-old had understood something profound that most adults never learned. That forgiveness wasn't just about accepting apologies. It was about leaving space for people to become better. Can I ask you something? Victoria said. Okay. Why did you forgive me so easily? Most people wouldn't. Sophie thought about this, her face serious. Daddy says holding grudges makes you tired, and I don't like being tired. She picked up her rabbit. Also, Mr. Hoppy says everybody deserves a second chance.
Mr. Hoppy is very wise. I know. He's 42 years old. Victoria smiled. That's very old for a rabbit.
They sat on the floor, surrounded by rocks and drawings, while Sophie explained the complex social dynamics of first grade and why the boy who pulled her hair at recess was actually just trying to be friends. Downstairs, Ryan made dinner. Victoria could smell something cooking, heard cabinet doors opening and closing. The ordinary sounds of a home that was actually lived in. After a while, Sophie yawned. I'm supposed to do my homework before dinner. Do you want to stay and eat with us? Victoria hesitated. I don't want to intrude. You're not intruding if I invited you. Sophie stood up and held out her hand. Come on, Daddy makes good spaghetti. Victoria let herself be pulled downstairs. Ryan was standing at the stove, stirring a pot of sauce. He looked up when they entered. Homework time, kiddo. I know, but I invited Victoria for dinner. Is that okay? Ryan's eyes met Victoria's. Something unspoken passed between them. That's fine. Set an extra place at the table. Sophie ran off to get her backpack. Victoria stood awkwardly in the kitchen doorway, not sure what to do with her hands. You don't have to stay if you don't want to, Ryan said quietly. Sophie gets attached quickly. She won't be offended if you have other plans. I don't have other plans. Victoria stepped into the kitchen. Can I help with anything? Can you chop vegetables? I can try. Ryan handed her a cutting board and a knife, showed her where the vegetables were in the refrigerator. They worked in comfortable silence while Sophie sat at the kitchen table practicing spelling words. I watched your press conference, Ryan said after a few minutes. Victoria's hand slipped slightly. The knife barely missed her finger. And it was either the bravest thing I've seen in a long time or the stupidest. Which one do you think it was? Ryan glanced at her. Both, but mostly brave. The legal team thinks I committed corporate suicide. Maybe. Or maybe you just reminded people that CEOs are human. Ryan added garlic to the sauce. Time will tell. They finished cooking in silence. Sophie complained about her math homework. Ryan explained long division with a patience that suggested he'd explained it many times before. Victoria set the table, feeling strange and out of place, but not entirely unwelcome. Dinner was spaghetti, with meat sauce, salad, and garlic bread. Simple food that tasted better than anything Victoria had eaten in months. Sophie talked through most of the meal, telling stories about school and her friends and the frog she'd found at recess that her teacher made her put back outside. Ryan listened with genuine interest, asking questions and laughing at the funny parts. Victoria watched them together and felt something ache in her chest. This was what a family looked like, not perfect, not polished. Just two people who loved each other sharing an ordinary evening. Victoria, do you have any kids? Sophie asked suddenly. No, sweetheart, I don't. Do you want kids? Sophie, Ryan said quietly. That's personal. It's okay, Victoria said. I used to want kids, a long time ago, but I chose work instead. And by the time I looked up from my desk, I'd forgotten how to want anything else. Sophie considered this. That's sad. It is, Victoria agreed, but I'm trying to remember now. After dinner, Sophie insisted on showing Victoria her favorite cartoon. They sat on the couch together while Ryan cleaned the kitchen. The show was something animated involving magical creatures and friendship lessons. Sophie explained the complex plot while leaning against Victoria's shoulder. Halfway through the second episode, Sophie fell asleep. Ryan appeared from the kitchen, saw them, and smiled. She does that, gets comfortable, and just crashes. Should I move? Give me a second. Ryan gently picked up his daughter, her head lolling against his shoulder. I'll be right back. He carried Sophie upstairs. Victoria sat alone in the living room, listening to Ryan's quiet footsteps above her. Heard him talking softly, heard Sophie's sleepy response, the sounds of bedtime rituals she'd never been part of. Ryan came back down a few minutes later. She wanted me to tell you good night. She's a wonderful kid. She is. Ryan sat in the chair across from the couch. She likes you. I like her too, which is surprising because I don't usually like children. That's because you've never given yourself permission to. Ryan's voice was gentle. You've spent so long being hard that you forgot what it feels like to be soft. Victoria looked down at her hands. Is that what you think? That I'm hard? I think you learned to be hard to survive, but survival isn't the same thing as living. The words hung in the air between them. When Catherine died, Ryan said quietly, I spent about 6 months just trying to get through each day. Wake up, feed Sophie, go to work, come home, put her to bed. Repeat. I wasn't living, I was just surviving. What changed? Sophie did. She asked me one morning why I never smiled anymore. Said it made her sad when I was sad. Ryan's voice was rough with emotion. I realized I'd been so focused on getting through the grief that I'd forgotten to show her what came after it. That life doesn't end when someone you love dies. It just changes. Victoria felt tears building again. I don't know how to change. I've been this person for so long. Then stop being that person. Choose to be someone different. It's not that simple, isn't it? Ryan leaned forward. You chose to come here tonight. To apologize to a 6-year-old you could have easily ignored. To stay for dinner instead of running back to your comfortable life. Those were choices, Victoria. Small ones, but they count. Victoria looked around the room, at the drawings on the refrigerator, the toys on the floor, the blanket Sophie had been wrapped in, evidence of a life built on love instead of ambition. I don't know if I can have this, Victoria said quietly. A family, a home, the kind of life you've built here. Why not? Because I've spent my entire adult life proving I didn't need it, and now I don't know how to admit that I do. Ryan was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up and walked to a bookshelf in the corner, pulled out a photo album, brought it back and sat beside Victoria on the couch. Catherine made this, he said, opening the album. It's pictures from our life together, before she got sick. The photos showed a younger Ryan with a beautiful woman with dark hair and bright eyes. Wedding photos, vacation photos, photos of Catherine pregnant, then holding a tiny newborn Sophie. Happy moments captured and preserved. She was diagnosed 2 weeks after this one was taken, Ryan said, pointing to a picture of Catherine holding 6-month-old Sophie at a park. She looked healthy, felt fine, no symptoms, and then suddenly we had 2 years, maybe less. Victoria looked at the photos, at the joy on Catherine's face, at Ryan looking at his wife like she was the entire world. She told me something before she died, Ryan continued. Said that she'd wasted too many years being afraid of not being successful enough, not being pretty enough, not being the perfect wife and mother and architect. And then she got cancer, and none of it mattered. What mattered? The moments, the ordinary, boring, beautiful moments. Ryan closed the album gently. Making breakfast, reading stories, sitting together doing nothing. That's what she wished she'd spent more time on, the moments instead of the achievements. Victoria's throat felt tight. Why are you telling me this? Because you remind me of her. Before she let go of all the fear. Ryan looked at Victoria seriously. You're terrified of being seen as weak or vulnerable or human, but the truth is, those are the things that make you worth knowing. Not your success, not your power, your humanity. I don't know how to be vulnerable. Start small. Admit when you're wrong. Ask for help. Let people see you're scared. Ryan's voice was soft. You already did that at the press conference. You told the truth even though it might cost you everything. That's vulnerability. Victoria wiped her eyes. My board gave me 6 months to prove I deserve to lead. What if I can't? Then you'll figure out what comes next. But at least you'll know you tried. They sat in silence for a few minutes. The house settled around them with the comfortable creaks of a building that had sheltered generations. I should go, Victoria said finally. It's late. Probably. Ryan stood up and walked her to the door. Thank you for coming, for apologizing to Sophie. It meant a lot to her. It meant a lot to me too. Victoria paused on the front porch. Ryan, can I ask you something? Sure. The dealership this morning, you knew exactly what was happening, didn't you? The corruption, the fraud. You set the whole thing up. Ryan smiled slightly. I had Margaret monitoring that location for months. When she told me about the irregularities, I wanted to see it for myself. Wanted to understand who was involved and how deep it went. And you brought Sophie with you. I bring Sophie everywhere. She's my daughter. But you knew there was a chance something would happen, that someone might treat you badly. Yes. Ryan's expression was calm. I also knew it would teach her an important lesson, that how people treat you when they think you're nobody tells you who they really are. What if I'd been kind? Would you still have exposed the corruption? Of course. The corruption wasn't about you, Victoria. It was about protecting the company and the employees who depend on it. Ryan looked at her seriously. But your cruelty taught me something too, that you'd lost your way, and that maybe, if someone gave you a mirror, you'd choose to find it again. Victoria felt something crack open in her chest. You were testing me. I was giving you an opportunity. What you did with it was up to you. And if I'd failed, if I'd stayed cruel and defensive, then you would have learned that too. But you didn't fail, Victoria. You chose to be better. That's not failure. Victoria looked out at the quiet street, at the houses with lights in the windows and cars in the driveways and lives being lived in ordinary, beautiful ways. I don't know what happens next, she admitted. Nobody does. That's what makes it life instead of a business plan. Victoria smiled despite everything. Thank you, Ryan, for today, for being honest, for leaving a door open. Sophie's words? Sophie's wisdom. Ryan laughed quietly. She gets it from her mother. Victoria walked to her car feeling lighter than she had in years. She drove home through the Chicago night, past the office buildings where she'd spent so many hours proving her worth, past the restaurants where she'd closed deals and made enemies and forgotten how to be human. When she got home, her apartment felt even emptier than usual. But instead of turning on the television or opening her laptop, Victoria sat on her uncomfortable couch and pulled out her phone. She scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she'd been avoiding for 3 years. Her mother. They'd fought about Victoria's priorities, about work consuming her life, about choosing career over family, and Victoria had stopped calling because it was easier than admitting her mother was right. The phone rang 4 times. Victoria almost hung up. Hello? Her mother's voice sounded older than Victoria remembered. Mom, it's me. Victoria. Silence. Then, Baby? Is everything okay? No, Victoria said, tears streaming down her face. But I'm trying to fix it, and I wanted to call and tell you that you were right about everything, and I'm sorry. Her mother started crying too. Oh, sweetheart, I've been waiting 3 years to hear you say that. They talked for 2 hours, about work and loneliness and the person Victoria had become, about her mother's life and the grandchildren Victoria didn't know very well because she'd been too busy to visit, about second chances and whether it was ever too late to start over. When Victoria finally hung up, it was past midnight. She was exhausted. Her eyes hurt from crying. But for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. She fell asleep on the couch again, but this time with her phone in her hand and the beginning of hope in her chest. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more questions about her leadership, more doubts about whether she could actually change. But tonight, she'd taken the first real steps toward becoming someone she might actually be able to respect. And somewhere across the city, in a house with blue siding and a tire swing, a little girl slept holding a stuffed rabbit and a drawing of a door left open. Victoria woke up to sunlight streaming through windows she'd forgotten to close, and her phone buzzing with notifications she didn't want to read. Her neck ached from sleeping on the couch. Her mouth tasted like regret and Thai food. But something felt different. Lighter, maybe. Or just less heavy. She checked her phone. 47 emails. 32 missed calls. Text messages from Patricia. From board members, from reporters who'd somehow gotten her personal number. And one text from an unknown number sent at 6:30 that morning. Sophie says thank you for coming. She drew you another picture. Ryan Victoria stared at the message for a long time before responding. Thank you for having me. Tell her I'd love to see it. She showered, made coffee that tasted like burnt regret because she'd forgotten how her expensive machine worked, and finally started going through the emails. Most were what she expected. Reporters requesting interviews, investors demanding explanations, employees expressing concern or support or just confusion about what happened next. But one email made her stop. It was from Marcus Chen. The subject line read, "We should talk." Victoria opened it with hands that shook slightly. Ms. Sterling, I watched your press conference yesterday. I don't know if what you said was genuine or strategy, but I'm willing to give you the benefit of the doubt. If you're serious about changing the culture at Sterling Industries, I'd like to be part of that conversation. I never wanted to destroy what you built. I just wanted it to be better. Marcus. Victoria read the email 3 times. Then she hit reply. Marcus, I'm serious, and I'd appreciate your help. Can we meet this week? Victoria. His response came back in less than 5 minutes. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Coffee shop on Madison, the one that's not a chain. Victoria smiled despite everything. I'll be there. The rest of the morning disappeared into phone calls and damage control. Patricia showed up at her apartment at noon with lunch and a folder full of documents that needed signatures. You look terrible, Patricia said, setting a salad on the coffee table. Thanks. That's exactly what I needed to hear. I'm serious. When's the last time you slept in an actual bed? Victoria thought about it. Tuesday? Maybe Monday. Patricia sat down with the kind of sigh that suggested she'd been waiting years to say what came next. Miss Sterling, I've worked for you for 4 years. In that time, I've watched you work yourself into exhaustion, skip meals, cancel doctor's appointments, and treat your body like it's an obstacle instead of something that keeps you alive. Patricia, I'm not finished. Patricia's voice was firm. You can't rebuild a company if you're too exhausted to think straight. You can't lead people if you can't take care of yourself. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to eat this salad, then you're going to take a nap, then you're going to go to the gym or for a walk or do literally anything that doesn't involve a computer screen. Victoria opened her mouth to argue. That wasn't a suggestion, Patricia said. Consider it your first assignment in becoming a better leader. Learn to be human. Victoria closed her mouth, picked up the salad, started eating. Patricia pulled out her tablet. The SEC investigation is moving forward. They've requested access to financial records from the past 3 years. Legal is cooperating fully like you asked. Good. The board wants a progress report in 2 weeks. David specifically asked that you focus on cultural changes, not just financial metrics. I will. And there's been interest from 3 different media outlets about doing longer profile pieces. Human interest stories about your transformation. Patricia looked up. I told them you'd think about it. Tell them no. Why? Victoria set down her fork. Because I haven't transformed yet. I've just admitted I need to. There's a difference. Patricia smiled. See, that's exactly the kind of thing that makes me think you might actually pull this off. They worked through the rest of the documents. Signatures and approvals and decisions that used to feel important but now just felt like paperwork. When Patricia finally left, Victoria did something she hadn't done in years. She turned off her phone, closed her laptop, and took a nap in her actual bed. She woke up 3 hours later feeling disoriented and slightly guilty for wasting an afternoon, but also more rested than she'd been in months. Her phone showed 2 missed calls when she turned it back on. One from David, one from Ryan. She called Ryan back first. Ms. Sterling, he answered on the second ring. You called? Sophie wanted to know if you'd like to come to her school play next Friday. She's a talking tree. Victoria felt something warm spread through her chest. A talking tree. Environmental awareness play. She has 4 lines, and she's been practicing them for 2 weeks. Ryan's voice held quiet amusement. Fair warning, it's probably going to be terrible, but she'd like you there. I'd love to come. Really? Really? Victoria sat down on her bed. Ryan, can I ask you something? Sure. Why are you doing this? Inviting me to dinners and school plays, letting me into your life when I gave you every reason not to. Ryan was quiet for a moment. Because I've been where you are. Not the CEO part, but the part where you wake up one day and realize you've become someone you don't recognize, someone you don't particularly like. What did you do? I had a 6-year-old daughter who needed me to be better, who deserved a father who was present instead of just surviving. Ryan's voice was soft. You don't have a daughter pushing you to change, so maybe you need a friend doing it instead. Victoria's throat felt tight. We're friends? I don't know. Are we? I'd like to be. Then we are. Ryan paused. The play is at 7. I'll text you the address. Thank you, Ryan. Thanks, Sophie. She's the one who invited you. They hung up. Victoria sat on her bed in her empty apartment and realized that for the first time in a decade, she had plans that didn't involve work. A coffee meeting with Marcus, a school play with a talking tree, dinner with her college roommate on Thursday. Small things. Ordinary things. The kind of things she'd convinced herself didn't matter. The week passed in a blur of work and small changes. Victoria started arriving at the office at 9 instead of 7. Started eating lunch instead of working through it. Started actually reading the employee satisfaction surveys
instead of just glancing at the summary numbers. She met with Marcus on Wednesday. The coffee shop was small and crowded and nothing like the polished conference rooms where she usually conducted business. Marcus was already there when she arrived, looking nervous and defiant in equal measure. "Thank you for coming," Victoria said, sitting down across from him. "Thank you for not bringing lawyers." They ordered coffee, sat in awkward silence until the drinks arrived. "I owe you an apology," Victoria said finally, "for dismissing your concerns, for making you feel like speaking up was a liability." Marcus stirred his coffee slowly. "I didn't file that complaint to hurt you. I know. You filed it because I'd created an environment where it felt like the only option." "Yeah." Marcus looked up. "I spent 9 months trying to get someone to listen. Tried going through proper channels, tried talking to HR, tried bringing data and documentation, and everyone kept telling me the same thing. That's just how things are done here. That's just how Ms. Sterling operates." Victoria winced. "And you realized the culture came from the top. I realized you'd built something successful, and then stopped questioning whether it was also good." Marcus's voice was careful, measured. "The revenue projections weren't technically fraud, but they were pushing boundaries. And when I asked questions, you made it clear that questioning was the same as doubting. I was wrong. I know. You said that at the press conference." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "The question is whether you meant it, or whether you're just doing damage control until the investigation blows over." Victoria met his eyes. "I meant it. But I don't expect you to believe me based on words. I need to prove it with actions." "Like what?" "Like implementing the ethics committee the board mandated. Like creating real channels for employees to raise concerns without fear of retaliation. Like bringing you back to Sterling Industries if you're willing." Marcus's eyebrows shot up. "You want me to come back? Not to your old position. To a new one. Chief Ethics Officer. Direct report to me and the board. Full authority to investigate concerns and override decisions that violate company values." Victoria pulled out a folder she'd brought. "It's a new position, the pay is competitive, and you'd have real power to change things." Marcus took the folder but didn't open it. "Why me?" "Because you were willing to risk everything to do the right thing. That's exactly the kind of person I need keeping me honest. I'd be reporting directly to you." "Yes, which means you'd have access to everything, full transparency, complete authority to call me out when I'm wrong." Marcus finally opened the folder, scanned the job description and salary range. His expression shifted from skeptical to cautiously interested. "I'd want final say on ethics committee membership," he said. "Agreed. And protection against retaliation in my employment contract. Already included. And the authority to conduct spot audits without prior approval." "Done." Victoria leaned forward. "Marcus, I can't undo the culture I created, but I can commit to building something better. I need people who aren't afraid to tell me when I'm wrong. People who care more about doing right than being liked. That's you." Marcus was quiet for a long time. "I need to think about it. Take all the time you need. I'll give you an answer by next week." They finished their coffee, talking about smaller things. Marcus's new job at a consulting firm, Victoria's upcoming board reviews, the investigation timeline. It wasn't comfortable exactly, but it was honest, and that felt like progress. Thursday evening, Victoria met Rachel at the coffee shop near her apartment. Her old college roommate looked the same, but different. Older, happier. Like she'd figured out how to live instead of just survive. "You look terrible," Rachel said, which seemed to be everyone's greeting lately. "So I've been told." They ordered drinks and found a table in the corner. For the first few minutes, conversation was stilted. Too many years of silence sat between them like a wall. "I'm sorry," Victoria said finally, "for disappearing, for choosing work over friendship, for becoming someone you wouldn't recognize." Rachel stirred her latte. "I tried to stay in touch for about 3 years, called on your birthday, sent Christmas cards, invited you to my wedding. I didn't come to your wedding." "No, you didn't. You sent an expensive gift and a card that said, 'Sorry, I can't make it. Work crisis.' Like there wasn't always a work crisis." Rachel's voice wasn't angry, just sad. "That's when I stopped trying. I don't blame you." "I know. That's part of the problem. You don't blame anyone for giving up on you because you've already given up on yourself." The words hit harder than Victoria expected. I'm trying to change that. Are you? Or are you just trying to save your job? Victoria flinched. Both, maybe. I don't know how to separate them anymore. Rachel took a sip of her latte. Do you remember sophomore year when you wanted to start that nonprofit? The one that helped women in underserved communities start small businesses? Vaguely. You were so passionate about it, stayed up until 3 a.m. writing grant proposals. Talked about changing the world through economic empowerment. Rachel smiled sadly. What happened to that version of you?
She grew up, realized that changing the world doesn't pay student loans. Bullshit. Rachel's voice was sharp now. She got scared. Scared that caring about people made her weak. Scared that showing vulnerability meant people would take advantage. So she built walls and called it success. Victoria opened her mouth to argue, closed it. You're right. I know I'm right. I've been right for 10 years. You just weren't ready to hear it. They sat in silence for a moment. Tell me about your life, Victoria said finally. Your wedding, your husband, everything I missed. Rachel's expression softened. For the next hour, she talked about meeting her husband at a community center where they both volunteered, about their small wedding with 60 people who actually mattered, about her job teaching high school English and coming home exhausted but fulfilled, about her life that was ordinary and beautiful and nothing like Victoria's. It's not impressive, Rachel said. Not by your standards. I'm not a CEO. I don't have a corner office or a car that costs more than most people's houses. But you're happy. Most days, yeah, I am. Victoria felt something ache in her chest. I can't remember the last time I was happy. Actually, happy. Not just successful or accomplished. Happy. That's because you've been measuring your life in achievements instead of moments. Rachel reached across the table and took Victoria's hand. Success is great, but it's a terrible substitute for joy. I don't know how to find joy. Start small. What makes you smile? Victoria thought about it. Sophie, Ryan's daughter. She's 6 and she has this stuffed rabbit, and she says things that are wiser than most adults I know. Rachel smiled. There you go. That's a start. They talked until the coffee shop closed, made plans to meet again next week, exchanged real promises instead of empty ones. And when Victoria left, she felt like she'd recovered something precious she'd thought was lost forever. Friday came faster than Victoria expected. She spent the day in meetings about quarterly projections and efficiency metrics and all the business concerns that used to feel crucial but now just felt like noise. At 6:30, she left the office for the first time in years while the sun was still setting. The elementary school was small and cheerful, decorated with children's artwork and handprint projects. The auditorium was packed with parents holding phones to record their children's moments of glory. Ryan was sitting in the 3rd row with an empty seat beside him. He waved when he saw Victoria. You made it, he said as she sat down. I made it. Where's the talking tree? 3rd from the left, the one who keeps adjusting her branches. Victoria spotted Sophie immediately. She was wearing a brown costume covered in green paper leaves, looking nervous and excited in equal measure. When she saw Victoria in the audience, her whole face lit up. She waved enthusiastically, losing one of her branches in the process. Ryan laughed quietly. She's been talking about you coming all week. Really? Really. Told her entire class that her new friend was coming to watch her be a tree. Ryan glanced at Victoria. You've made quite an impression. The play started before Victoria could respond. It was exactly as terrible as Ryan had warned. Kids forgot their lines. The scenery fell over twice. One of the flowers started crying and had to be escorted off stage by a teacher. But it was also perfect in the way that things made by children trying their best always are. When Sophie delivered her 4 lines about the importance of protecting forests, she spoke clearly and seriously, like she was delivering a speech to world leaders instead of an audience of indulgent parents. Victoria found herself clapping harder than she'd clapped for anything in years. After the play, parents flooded the stage to collect their small actors. Sophie ran straight to her father, branches flying, leaves scattering in her wake. Did you see me? Did I do good? You were perfect, Ryan said, scooping her up in a hug. Victoria, did you see me? I saw you. You were the best tree in the entire forest. Sophie beamed. Then she reached into her costume and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I made this for you. Victoria unfolded it carefully. It was another drawing. This time it showed 4 stick figures. A tall man,
a small girl with a rabbit, and two women with long hair standing beside them. One of the women was labeled Victoria in careful, wobbly letters. The other was labeled Mama with a small heart. Victoria's breath caught. "Daddy says Mama's watching from heaven," Sophie explained seriously. "But I think she'd like you, so I put you both in the picture together." Victoria knelt down so she was eye level with Sophie. "Thank you, sweetheart. This is the most beautiful gift anyone's ever given me." "Really?" "Really." Sophie hugged her, leaves crunching between them, and Victoria held on tight, feeling something in her chest break open completely. Later, after Sophie had been collected by her grandmother, who was taking her for a sleepover, Ryan and Victoria stood in the school parking lot under streetlights that flickered slightly. "That picture," Victoria said quietly. "That was a lot," Ryan finished. "I know. I saw it before she gave it to you. Told her maybe it was too personal, but she insisted." "Why?" Ryan was quiet for a moment. "Because Sophie sees the world differently than we do. She doesn't understand why people can't just be part of each other's lives. Why grief has to mean closing doors instead of finding new ones to walk through." Victoria looked down at the drawing still clutched in her hand. "She put me next to her mother, like I belong there." "Maybe you do." Victoria looked up sharply. "Ryan, I'm not saying that to pressure you, or to suggest something that isn't there." Ryan's voice was careful. "I'm just saying that Sophie sees something in you that she trusts, and maybe that's worth paying attention to." "I don't know how to be what she needs. She doesn't need you to be anything except honest, present, willing to show up." Ryan smiled slightly. "You're already doing that." Victoria felt tears building for what seemed like the 100th time this week. "I'm a disaster. My company is under investigation. My board barely trusts me. I'm trying to rebuild my entire life from scratch." "I know. And you're doing it anyway. That's not disaster. That's courage." They stood in silence for a moment, the parking lot emptying around them as families collected their small actors and headed home. "Ryan, can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask." "I might not answer." "Do you ever think about moving on?" After Catherine, about finding someone else. Ryan was quiet for a long time. "Every day. And then I feel guilty for even thinking about it." "Why guilty?" "Because Catherine deserves to be mourned, remembered, not replaced." "Moving on isn't the same as replacing," Victoria said quietly. "It's just choosing to keep living instead of staying frozen in grief." "Is that what you think I'm doing? Staying frozen?" "No, but I think you're afraid that being happy again means you didn't love her enough." Ryan looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "How do you know that?" "Because I spent 10 years afraid that being vulnerable meant I wasn't strong enough. Fear makes us lie to ourselves about what we deserve." Ryan exhaled slowly. "Catherine told me something before she died. Made me promise something." "What?" "She said that grief was a tax I'd pay for loving her. That it would hurt, and it should hurt, because she mattered. But she also said that someday, when Sophie was older and I was ready, I should find someone else to build a life with, someone who made me remember what happiness felt like." Victoria's throat felt tight. "And have you? Found someone?" Ryan looked at her for a long moment. "I'm starting to think I might have." The words hung in the air between them like something fragile and precious and terrifying. "I'm not good at this," Victoria said. "Relationships, vulnerability, being someone's person." "Neither am I. Not anymore. Haven't had practice in a long time. I'm broken. Still trying to figure out how to be human again." "So am I. Catherine's been gone 3 years, and some days I still set the table for 3 people before I remember." Victoria stepped closer. "This is a terrible idea. Probably the worst idea either of us has had in years. We should be sensible, take things slowly, focus on rebuilding our own lives before trying to build something together." "Absolutely. That's the smart thing to do." They were standing close enough now that Victoria could see the gold flecks in Ryan's eyes, could count the tired lines around them, could see the man behind the careful control. "So we're agreed," Victoria said. We'll be sensible." "Completely sensible." Ryan kissed her. It wasn't dramatic or sweeping or any of the things movies promised first kisses should be. It was tentative and uncertain and tasted a little like the coffee they'd both had hours ago.
But it was also honest, real. Two broken people choosing to risk being broken together instead of staying safe alone. When they pulled apart, Ryan laughed quietly. So much for being sensible. We can start being sensible tomorrow. Tomorrow works. They stood in the parking lot for another few minutes, holding hands like teenagers who didn't want the night to end. Finally, Ryan checked his watch. I should get home. My mother-in-law is watching Sophie, but she has an early morning tomorrow. Okay. Can I see you this weekend? Actual plans, not just emergencies or school plays? Victoria smiled. I'd like that. Saturday, dinner, somewhere that's not either of our houses, because if we're doing this, we should probably do it right. Doing this. Are we doing this? Ryan squeezed her hand. I think we are. Unless you've changed your mind in the last 30 seconds. No, still terrified, still willing to try. Good, me too. They said goodnight. Victoria drove home through Chicago streets that looked the same but felt different. She parked in her building's garage, rode the elevator to her floor, and walked into her apartment that was still empty but didn't feel quite as lonely. She set Sophie's drawing on her refrigerator with a magnet, looked at it for a long time. 4 stick figures. A family cobbled together from grief and mistakes and second chances. Maybe that's what family was. Not perfect people living perfect lives, just people who chose to keep showing up for each other even when it was hard. The next 3 months passed in a blur of work and small changes and learning how to live instead of just survive. Marcus accepted the chief ethics officer position and immediately started making Victoria's life difficult in exactly the way she needed. He questioned decisions, challenged assumptions, forced her to defend choices based on values instead of just profitability. It was exhausting. It was also exactly what Sterling Industries needed. The SEC investigation concluded with no charges filed. The revenue projections had pushed boundaries but hadn't crossed legal lines. The company paid a fine for reporting irregularities and committed to enhanced oversight. It could have been worse. The board's quarterly review was tense but ultimately positive. Employee satisfaction surveys showed improvement. Turnover was down. The new ethics committee was functioning. David pulled Victoria aside afterward and told her he was proud of her. It was the first time he'd said that in 5 years. Victoria started having weekly dinners with her mother, started visiting her brother and his family, started rebuilding relationships she'd let atrophy because work seemed more important. She and Rachel met for coffee every Thursday. Sometimes they talked about serious things. Sometimes they just laughed about college memories and complained about getting older. It was ordinary. It was precious. And Ryan. Dating Ryan was like learning a new language. He was patient and kind and understood grief in ways most people didn't. They took things slowly. Dinner dates, movies, long walks along the lake where they talked about everything and nothing. Sophie was part of it from the beginning. She'd appointed herself relationship supervisor, offering advice about which restaurants had the best mac and cheese, and reminding them both that holding hands in public was very important for showing you like each other. 6 months after the press conference, Victoria stood in front of Sterling Industries' annual shareholder meeting and delivered a report that was part financial metrics and part confession. We've had a challenging year, she told the room full of investors and analysts. We faced an SEC investigation. We confronted uncomfortable truths about our corporate culture. We had to admit that success without integrity is worthless. She paused, looking around at faces that ranged from supportive to skeptical. But we survived. Not because we were perfect, because we chose to be honest. Victoria clicked to the next slide showing employee satisfaction scores. Our people are happier. Our culture is stronger. Our values actually mean something beyond words on a website. Another slide. Financial projections that were honest instead of optimistic. Our growth has slowed. That's what happens when you stop pushing boundaries and start respecting them. But our foundation is solid. Our reputation is recovering. And for the first time in years, I can stand here and tell you that I'm proud of the company we're building instead of just the profits we're generating. The applause was real, not overwhelming, not universal, but real. Afterward, David found her in the hallway. That was a good speech. It was an honest speech. Same thing sometimes, David smiled. I'm retiring next year. The board wants to know if you're ready to take over as chairman. Victoria's first instinct was to say yes immediately.
to grab the power and the title and the validation, but she paused. Can I think about it? David looked surprised. You're not sure?
I'm sure I could do it. I'm not sure I should. Not yet. Victoria looked at him seriously. I've spent the last 6 months learning how to be a better CEO, learning how to lead with integrity instead of just ambition. I need more time before adding another title to that. David studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. That's exactly the answer that makes me think you're ready. But take your time. The position will be there when you are. That evening, Victoria met Ryan and Sophie at the park near Ryan's house. Sophie was on the swings, going higher and higher, her laughter carrying across the playground. Ryan stood beside Victoria, watching his daughter with the quiet contentment of a parent whose child was simply, perfectly happy. She asked me something this morning, Ryan said. What? She asked if you were going to be her new mom. Victoria's heart stopped. What did you tell her? I told her that's not how it works, that you can't replace someone who's gone, but that sometimes, if you're very lucky, you find new people to love who make the family bigger instead of filling in what's missing. What did she say? Ryan smiled. She said that made sense, and then she asked if that meant she could have 2 moms, one in heaven and one who came to her school plays. Victoria felt tears building. And I said maybe, if that's what everyone wanted, but that it was a question for grown-ups to figure out when they were ready. Victoria watched Sophie on the swings, watched her fearlessly reach for the sky, confident that the chains would hold her, that the ground would catch her if she fell, that the world was safe because the people who loved her made it that way. I'm not ready to be anyone's mother, Victoria said quietly. I barely know how to take care of myself. I know, but I'd like to learn, if you're willing to be patient with me. Ryan took her hand. I've got nothing but patience. Sophie noticed them watching and waved enthusiastically. Victoria, come push me. I want to go to the moon. Victoria laughed and walked toward the swings, toward the little girl who'd taught her about forgiveness, toward the man who'd shown her that broken things could be beautiful, toward a life she was finally learning how to build instead of just survive. She pushed Sophie higher, listening to her delighted squeals, feeling the evening sun warm on her face and Ryan's presence solid beside her. This wasn't a fairy tale ending. There were no guarantees, no promises that everything would work out perfectly. Victoria still had bad days where she reverted to old patterns, still caught herself measuring worth in achievements instead of moments, still struggled with vulnerability and trust and believing she deserved happiness. But she was trying, every day. Choosing to show up and be honest and risk being hurt because the alternative was the cold, empty apartment she'd lived in for too long. That night, after Sophie had gone to bed and Ryan and Victoria sat on his porch watching the stars come out, he asked her what she was thinking. I'm thinking about doors, Victoria said. Doors? Sophie's drawing. The one where she left a door open for me to walk through. Victoria leaned against Ryan's shoulder. I spent so many years closing doors, shutting people out, building walls and calling it strength. And then a 6-year-old showed me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is leave a door open and trust that the right people will walk through. Ryan kissed the top of her head. She's wise beyond her years. She gets it from her parents. She gets it from her mother. Catherine always said that love was about opening doors, not closing them, about making space for people instead of protecting space from them. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the neighborhood settle into night, dogs barking, kids being called inside, cars pulling into driveways, the ordinary sounds of ordinary lives being lived by ordinary people who were all just trying their best. Ryan? Yeah? Thank you. For what? For seeing something in me worth saving when I couldn't see it myself. For being patient. For leaving doors open even when I didn't deserve it. Ryan turned to look at her, his expression serious. You always deserved it, Victoria. You just didn't believe you did. There's a difference. I'm starting to believe it now. Good. Because it's true. Victoria went home later that night to her apartment that was still too big and too empty but felt less lonely than it used to. She made tea and sat on her couch with Sophie's drawing in her lap and thought about the person she'd been 6 months ago. That Victoria would have called this weakness, would have seen vulnerability as failure. would have measured her life in titles and profits and the respect of people who didn't actually know her. But somewhere between a luxury car showroom and a talking tree and a little girl with a stuffed rabbit, she'd learned something that changed everything. Success meant nothing if you achieved it alone. Power meant nothing if you used it to push people away. Strength meant nothing if it came from refusing to admit you were human. The only thing that actually mattered was the connections you built, the people you let in, the moments you chose to be present for instead of distracted by ambition and fear. Victoria picked up her phone and sent a text to Ryan. "I love you. I'm terrified to say it, but I'm more terrified of not saying it." His response came back immediately. "I love you too. Have for a while now. Was waiting for you to catch up." Victoria laughed, alone in her apartment, feeling lighter than she'd felt in years. The future was uncertain. She might fail at being a better CEO, might fail at being a good partner to Ryan, might fail at being the kind of person Sophie could look up to. But she was going to try, every single day, because the alternative was going back to the cold, hollow existence she'd mistaken for success. And she'd finally learned that surviving wasn't the same as living, that power without compassion was poison, that the only thing worth building was something that made people's lives better. That broken things could be beautiful if you were willing to do the work of putting them back together. That sometimes the quietest person in the room was the most dangerous. And that sometimes, if you were very lucky, a 6-year-old with a stuffed rabbit would teach you everything you needed to know about what actually mattered. Victoria fell asleep that night with her phone in her hand and Sophie's drawing on her nightstand and the knowledge that tomorrow would bring more challenges and more chances to fail and more opportunities to choose who she wanted to be. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, she was excited to find out. Because somewhere across the city, a little girl was sleeping peacefully, dreaming about talking trees and doors left open for people who needed them. And somewhere in a house with blue siding and a tire swing, a man who'd rebuilt his life from grief was learning to hope again. And somewhere in a too-big apartment overlooking Lake Michigan, a woman who'd forgotten how to be human was finally remembering. The story didn't have a perfect ending, but it had an honest one. And sometimes that was better.